Chapter 649, Caring Old Brother. 1. The imperial hunting grounds were surrounded by beautiful scenery, with mountains, waters, and forests. Since Chu Lian was injured, the emperor allowed her to stay in her tent to rest. She didn't need to participate in any activities. Those who were injured were probably the idlest within the entire camp. Wenqing had informed her that, while she was still sleeping, some people had come to check on her situation, such as old Duke Zheng, Sima Hui, and Captain Guo. Sima Hui had also left behind a maidservant, who was skilled in medicine. Chu Lian walked to the lakeside nearby with Wenqing's support. There was something that she couldn't understand. Why was her husband, He Changdi, whom she needed the most, still missing? Even people like Sima Hui, Captain Guo, and Xiao Hongyu had come to express their concern when they found out about her accident. She took a deep breath of the refreshingly cool spring air to suppress the resentment in her heart. If the emperor hadn't made arrangements for the officials who came, then she really wanted to rush to He Changdi and ask about his current thoughts. She was seriously frustrated right now. Even if he was dissatisfied with her, they still had to meet each other to make things clear. What was he trying to do by avoiding her? Chu Lian turned around and instructed Wenlan, "Go inquire about Imperial Princess Liao's situation. Also, check if my husband is over at her side." Just as Chu Lian finished speaking, she heard the sound of a woman's voice. Chu Lian turned around and looked towards the direction of that voice. She saw them at the lakeside about 50 to 60 meters away. A man in a black robe with an icy face and a sword strapped at his waist was walking beside a young girl sitting in a wooden wheelchair. There were 5 maidservant and court attendants behind the young girl. Who else could they be other than He Changdi and Imperial Princess Liao? Chu Lian's clear eyes narrowed slightly. She stared at He Changdi and Imperial Princess Liao, who were currently taking a stroll beside the lake. Her mouth tilted upwards into a mocking smirk. The inner radiance on her beautiful face dimmed slightly. So it turned out that He Changdi had been avoiding her because he was accompanying the injured Imperial Princess Liao. Well, she really learned something from that. Wenqing and Wenlan, who were standing behind Chu Lian, also frowned when they saw the scene in front of them. They couldn't understand what third young master was doing right now. When had he become so close with Imperial Princess Liao? He Changdi had a cold expression on his face. With narrowed eyes and a bottomless gaze, it was hard to tell what he was thinking about. When looking carefully, he seemed to have 2 dark smudges under his eyes. He suddenly sensed a familiar gaze on him. The moment he raised his head to look, he met with Chu Lian's astounded gaze. He Changdi's eyebrows instantly furrowed and a flash of pain appeared within his eyes when he looked at Chu Lian. He leaned forward slightly, wanting to run over to her immediately, but he suddenly thought of something and stopped himself from moving. He took in a deep breath and suppressed the raging impulse within himself. Then, he turned his eyes away coldly. Out of the corner of Chu Lian's eyes, she could see Imperial Princess Liao revealing a jeering and proud smile. Chu Lian controlled her emotions and forced out a faint smile. She bobbed a greeting toward Imperial Princess Liao from afar, then resolutely turned around and left without looking back again. Wenqing and Wenlan, who were following behind Chu Lian, were also infuriated. They positioned themselves on either side of Chu Lian so they completely blocked Chu Lian's figure, making sure that the people behind them couldn't see her at all. When Chu Lian returned to the tent, she went back into the bed to sulk. She had originally wanted to go out to get some fresh air, but she hadn't expected that it would make her feel even more frustrated instead. Damn it, He Changdi was seriously so toxic. Shortly afterwards, Wenqing reported the information that she had found regarding Imperial Princess Liao's situation. When she mentioned Imperial Princess Liao's injury, Chu Lian didn't feel any sympathy for her at all. There was even a faint sense of delight within her heart. Imperial Princess Liao had been hostile towards her since the first time she entered the palace. Her hostility had become even more obvious nowadays. She still didn't understand He Changdi's intentions. Although Imperial Princess Liao was still very young, her intentions were clear. Did He Sanlang really want to become the emperor's son-in-law and marry a princess? The Great Wu dynasty wasn't the same as the previous dynasty. A princess husband wouldn't be given any actual power. If he married the emperor's daughter, then he would just become an idle plaything waiting for death. Chu Lian's mind was in a jumbled mess. The hunting ground was located in the outskirts of the capital. The weather lagged slightly behind the capital. It was still pretty cold at night. She had ridden all the way here, then suffered a fright yesterday. Thus, she hadn't gotten a good night's rest last night. Chu Lian had obviously become thinner. She looked pale and haggard now. It seemed like all the previous nourishing for her body had been for naught. Wenlan's heart seriously ached. She and her sister knew some martial arts, so they would usually be responsible for taking care of Chu Lian when she goes out. However, Xian was definitely the maidservant whom third young madam trusted the most within the estate. The night before they had departed, Xian had specially told them to take good care of third young madam's health. Senior servant Zhong had also left some words for them in particular. After all, third young madam's health had become better and the young couple had a loving relationship. It was entirely possible that there was already a young heir in her belly. Well, look at what happened now. Not only third young madam had not gained any weight, but she had even become thinner than before. Chapter 650. Transmigrator meets Reincarnator. Chapter 650. Caring Old Brother, 2. This story is completely free to read on Volaranovels. Please support my translations on the original source. Chu Lian was so angry that she didn't even have an appetite. Over the past couple of days, she ate very lightly for all her meals. Wenlan asked worriedly, "Third young madam, do you have anything that you want to eat for lunch? This servant will go prepare it for you." Third young madam usually placed a lot of importance with regards to food, but she just waved her hand in disinterest now. "Just prepare a few simple dishes. I ate very little this morning, so prepare for lunch earlier." Wenlan didn't understand Chu Lian's meaning and thought that third young madam's appetite had recovered. With a happy expression on her face, she took 2 maidservants with her to pick out the ingredients. Chu Lian really did have lunch a lot earlier this afternoon. She ate about 2 hours earlier than usual. However, she didn't eat as much as Wenlan had expected. Chu Lian only drank half a bowl of the fragrant old duck stew before saying she was full. After that, she went behind the screen to take an afternoon nap. When He Changdi returned at noon, Chu Lian had just gone to sleep an hour ago. When he entered the tent and noticed that it was completely quiet, his expression became even more stern and cold. "Your young madam hasn't eaten yet?" Wenqing replied with her head bowed, replying to third young master, "Third young madam ate 2 hours ago. She's taking a nap right now." Though Wenqing's words sounded respectful, they lacked some emotion. He Changdi could sense the changes within the entire tent. He had been intending to mention having lunch with Chu Lian, but he decided to give up on the idea in the end. He waved his hand at Wenqing, "You can go." Wenqing left the tent without even looking back. Lai Yu was waiting outside and went up to Wenqing when he saw her come out. Lai Yu's face was full of anxiety. "My dear sister Wenqing, how's the situation inside?" "What do you mean?" Lai Yu pulled Wenqing to the side and whispered, "Didn't you notice that third young madam is quarreling with third young master? What do you think happened? They were fine earlier, but everything suddenly changed." Wenqing was already angry at He Changdi, so her anger was instantly ignited when the tactless Lai Yu began making false assumptions. It seemed like the saying that servants will act the same as their masters was true. This Lai Yu wasn't a good person either. "Open your damned eyes and have a good look. Is it third young madam's fault? Or third young master's fault? If you don't know the answer, then you're also not allowed to eat, just like your third young master." Lai Yu widened his eyes in shock and pulled on Wenqing's sleeve. My dear ancestor. Please, I'm seriously begging you. Please give me a bowl of food. I've been running around for the whole morning and I haven't even had a sip of water." Wenqing sneered. "What? The snacks over at Imperial Princess Liao's place wasn't enough to fill your stomach? Stop pretending to be so pitiful in front of me." Lai Yu felt pity for himself inwardly. "Sister Wenqing, please don't misunderstand me. I went out for an errand early this morning. I never went to Imperial Princess Liao's side." Wenqing was stunned. "You didn't go to Imperial Princess Liao's tent?" Lai Yu shook his head and his face was scrunched up like an orange. So only third young master went. I'm not sure about that. That's not something I would dare ask third young master about. Wenqing gave him a fierce glare. You're so useless. No. Sister, I'm really innocent. Please spare me some food. Lai Yu really did look quite pitiful. There were stains all over his green robe and stubble had grown on his chin. His hair was also in a mess. Just by looking at his appearance, he really looked like a random refugee. Wenqing harumphed. Come with me. Third young madam has some leftovers from lunch. You got lucky. Lai Yu smiled, flashing a mouth full of white teeth. All right. It's fine as long as there's something to eat. I don't mind. The hungry He Changdi, who wasn't even in the mood to eat, would never have thought that his personal manservant had already abandoned him. Each household was to take care of their own food and needs on the hunting grounds, as the imperial family wouldn't care about their survival. Even if He Changdi was on duty every day, he still needed to have his meals in his own tent. Chu Lian had purposely eaten earlier to avoid having to sit at the same table as He Changdi. However, she didn't expect Wenqing and Wenlan to be even more harsh. They hadn't even prepared any food for He Changdi. Regardless, He Changdi didn't have any appetite right now. His head and heart were in a complete daze. He tiptoed around the screen to check on Chu Lian. Chu Lian was laying on her side with her back facing him. Her soft little body was curled up into a ball. He reached out, about to touch her, but he retracted his hand halfway through. He closed his eyes, then walked around the screen and laid down on the chaise beside it for a while. Chu Lian opened her eyes once he left. Chu Lian stared at the ceiling and blinked furiously. She hadn't actually fallen asleep just now. After a long moment, she smiled at herself mockingly. It seemed like it would be impossible to get an explanation from He Changdi. Forget it. If he didn't want to speak, then so be it. Chu Lian angrily turned over, closed her eyes, and fell asleep for real. He Changdi wasn't in the tent anymore when she woke up. In the afternoon, the emperor took his men to the forest in the mountain to hunt. Royal Princess Duanjia sent someone to bring over some wild meat, including wild duck, pheasant, and a deer. There was supposed to be a bonfire banquet tonight, but Chu Lian used her ill health as an excuse to decline attendance. However, Chu Lian felt bad for not doing anything at all when facing the game that had been sent over. Wenqing brought a rocking chair over for her. She sat on the chair and directed the maidservants on how to roast the game. After they finished preparing the wild meats, Chu Lian didn't even take a bite. She ordered people to send them to old Duke Zheng, Royal Princess Duanjia, Prince Jin, and the others. Chapter 651. Caring Old Brother, 3. There were still 2 hours before tonight's bonfire banquet. He Changdi was sulking while sitting inside Prince Jin's tent. Although his handsome face was as cold as ever, but it was also very pale and haggard. Prince Jin lifted the tent flap and saw his good friend was sitting beside the table in a daze. He glanced at him calmly with his blue eyes. What's wrong? Why do you look so lifeless? He Changdi's thin lips were tightly pursed and his eyes were lowered, as if he was a statue that couldn't speak. Prince Jin took off his cloak and handed it to the attendant beside him. After that, he walked towards He Changdi and carefully examined him from head to toe a couple of times. His clothes were disheveled. He appeared haggard and miserable. He had an unkempt beard and bloodshot eyes with dark shadows under them. TSK. What in the world had happened to this guy? As soon as Prince Jin sat down, a maidservant brought over a warming soup. He hadn't even lifted his spoon when He Changdi gloomily said, "Give me a bowl, too." Prince Jin was stunned now. He held the spoon and looked at his close friend with furrowed brows. With the meals that Genie cooks, you still want the food prepared here? When Guilin restaurant had still been open, he would go to the restaurant to satisfy his cravings. Even a dignified prince had to visit a restaurant in order to satisfy his appetite. On the other hand, He Changdi was actually going around outside to eat other people's crudely made food. What a joke. He Sanlang was indifferent to Prince Jin's teasing and said faintly, "I haven't eaten anything for a whole day and night." Prince Jin. Would Genie starve you? That girl was a foodie. She was probably stuffing her face whenever she was free. There was no way she didn't prepare any food. Even if she didn't make it herself, she still had 2 maidservants, who had learned some of her skills, beside her. No matter what, Changdi wouldn't be starved. Sanlang didn't say anything and remained silent. When the maidservant brought another bowl of soup over, he held it up and finished it in one breath. He wasn't tasting the food at all and was just simply trying to fill his stomach. Prince Jin was somewhat dumbfounded and shook his head helplessly. I wanted you to taste it properly. Although the soup isn't as delicious as the foods that Genie makes, it's still considered a delicacy. While Prince Jin was drinking his soup, his attendant came in to make a report. Reporting to 4th Prince, Honored Lady Genie sent over some wild game. Would you like to try some right now? Prince Jin was stunned and raised his brows. Look at that. The moment he mentioned Chu Lian, she had sent over some food for him to eat. Bring them in. The attendant hastily went out. A moment later, he came in with a food box. Then, he took out the 2 plates of meat from the food box and placed them on the table. A plate of venison and a plate of duck meat, which were already sliced up. They had just been roasted, so the roast meat inside the plates was still steaming with heat. The fragrance of the meat billowed up into their faces. Prince Jin picked up his chopsticks and pointed at the 2 plates in front of him. You've been exposed. Can you still say you didn't eat anything? Genie wouldn't have sent all the roasted meats that she prepared over to me, right? Changdi had a bitter expression on his face because it was true. Chu Lian hadn't left any of her cooking for him to eat. Without hesitation, Sanlang picked up his chopsticks, grabbed a piece of roasted meat, and stuffed it into his mouth. It was crispy and tender, a taste that was unforgettable for a lifetime. It had definitely been roasted with Chu Lian's recipe. However, his mouth was filled with bitterness when eating such delicious delicacies. Prince Jin didn't think his good friend would suddenly start digging into his food. He complained, "Hey, aren't you being too rude? Genie sent these for me to eat. If you want to eat, then have Genie make some for you. You can eat as much as you want. Why are you taking my share?" Although Prince Jin complained, he didn't stop his friend's action. He knew his friend was in a bad mood. He had only interrupted to distract his friend from his thoughts. The 2 plates of roast meats were soon cleared by these 2 grown men. Prince Jin leaned back against his chair slightly. His gaze fell upon his friend, who was still in a daze. Say it. What happened? Did you have an argument with Genie? Sanlang rubbed his stiff face and took a deep breath. Liana is mad at me. Prince Jin lifted his pair of unique eyes. Tell me about it. Sanlang and Prince Jin were sworn brothers who had grown up together. Since their previous lifetime, they had been best friends who could risk their lives for each other. Thus, there was nothing they couldn't talk about. After some deliberation, Changdi told him the whole story. Prince Jin was slightly stunned after listening to him. His blue eyes flickered in disbelief. You wouldn't actually be interested in that brat Liao, right? Changdi was dumbfounded by his friend's question. He had a grim expression on his face and his voice had a sense of anger. Luyi, what do you mean? Prince Jin sneered coldly. You embraced her and you've been accompanying her. Doesn't that mean you're interested in that brat? Changdi. Don't misunderstand. Imperial Princess Liao is only 11 years old. I'm not a pervert. Haha. It was His Majesty's order. I can't reject an imperial order. Prince Jin gave his idiotic friend a glare and scoffed. Are you an idiot? Liao is already 11 years old. Are there any imperial children who are actually naive? Don't tell me that Liao is still young. In another year, she is going to be 12. Even for noble families, marriage arrangements can begin when they are 12. Liao is resentful towards Genie. Haven't you ever considered Genie's feelings? In my opinion, you're probably worse than Xiaobo Giant. Prince Jin's last comment was somewhat harsh, but when facing someone so oblivious, he had to knock him awake somehow. TL note, food porn after a long time tilde. I love roasted duck tilde, that crispy, fatty skin and the soft, tender meat inside. Asterisk drools asterisk roasted venison roasted duck. Chapter 652, Caring Old Brother, 4. When Changdi finally understood Prince Jin's words, he instantly felt enlightened. His expression suddenly became grave, while he felt guilty and terrified inwardly. He clenched his fist and finally restrained his erupting emotions. He asked in a cold voice, "Yi, how's the investigation going?" A dangerous glint instantly emerged within Prince Jin's previously jeering and teasing gaze. Both Liao's injury and Jinyi's fall from the horse were prearranged, but I haven't been able to track down the real mastermind. I can't be certain that the mastermind is sixth brother. A dangerous and icy glint flashed through He Changdi's deep gaze. Prince Jin tapped on the round table with one of his slender fingers. "However, there's something I don't understand. I can understand them scheming against you, but why are they also harming Genie? Even if Xiao Bojian still has lingering feelings for Chu Lian, he didn't need to risk his life. Moreover, he did it in front of father." This was indeed a mystery. During this lifetime, Chu Lian didn't have any relationship with Xiao Bojian at all. Furthermore, she had nothing to do with all the fighting and scheming for power. However, she had been unknowingly implicated into this struggle for power. Even He Changdi, who was a reincarnator, couldn't figure this out. "What do you think?" He Sanlang shook his head. "You don't have to worry. I'll protect Liana." Prince Jin didn't continue speaking. They remained silent for a while before Prince Jin began telling him to leave. "All right, hurry up and leave. I have to rest. I can't sleep while looking at your ice block face." He Changdi stood up and left with a frosty expression. There was still an hour before the bonfire banquet that the emperor is hosting. He wanted to go back to check on Chu Lian, but he still felt somewhat awkward about the situation. He Sanlang looked around, then turned and walked towards Captain Guo and Zhong Mai's tent. Captain Guo's wife was completely unrelated to the imperial family, so he had come to the spring hunt alone this time and stayed in the same tent as Zhong Mai. He walked up to the tent and looked at the familiar curtain. He remembered the time he had spent at the northern border with his brothers in the military. He Changdi's stiff expression slightly loosened up. The soldier at the entrance recognized He Changdi, so he immediately went in to report his arrival after giving him a salute. A moment later, the soldier lifted the curtain and he strode inside. Captain Guo and Zhong Mai were sitting around a small table, while drinking wine and eating roasted meat. They were spending their days quite leisurely. When Captain Guo saw that it was He Changdi, he quickly waved at him. "Zhixiang, come and sit down." He Changdi strode towards the small table and sat on the floor together with them. A woolen carpet was spread out on the floor of the tent, so it wasn't cold. He pursed his lips as his gaze swept over the two familiar-looking plates of roasted meat on the small table. Captain Guo was a rough old man who didn't really observe other persons' moods, so he bluntly said, "Your wife had someone send them over. It's so damn delicious. You're such a lucky guy." As he spoke, he ripped off a piece of roasted meat with his hand and threw it into his mouth, while also displaying a blissful expression. Frustration piled upon He Changdi at the sight. He decided to just lower his head. If he didn't see it, then he wouldn't be bothered by it. Zhong Mai, who was beside them, was much more sensitive than Captain Guo. He carefully observed He Changdi and creased his brows. "Zhixiang, what's with your appearance?" He Changdi normally wasn't very concerned about his appearance, but he would at least maintain a clean and tidy appearance. Under decent circumstances, he wouldn't treat himself poorly. Most of all, he had Chu Lian to take care of him. After returning to the capital, he had been wearing fine clothes and eating delicious foods. He had a well-proportioned figure with broad shoulders and slender waist as well as a handsome face. Although he always kept a cold expression on his face, he possessed a charming air. As long as he dressed up a little, he would look the same as any noble gentleman. Some of his peers were even imitating his style in secret. Taking for example, the green jade thumb ring that he wore on his hand. It was originally just something that military officials would wear to protect their finger when shooting. Ever since He Changdi had started to wear that thick jade thumb ring throughout the year, even the literary officials in the court had also started wearing jade thumb rings. Rather unlike his usual neat appearance, He Changdi looked quite rough right now. He looked even worse than when he had been at the northern border. He Changdi had a cold expression on his face. After a while, he uttered a response. "I have a subordinate whose wife is angry at him." Over these past few days, he has been absent-minded and doesn't know how to coax her. After he said that, Captain Gu stopped eating and exchanged glances with Zhong Mai. They both looked at He Changdi as if they had seen a ghost. What the heck? Did this guy even know how to lie? His story sounded too fake. Wasn't the subordinate that he mentioned himself? Captain Gu and Zhong Mai couldn't help the twitching of their lips. So even the highly skilled Marquis An Yuan, who was firm and decisive on the battlefield and talented at training troops, faced such mundane problems. After a brief pause, Captain Gu and Zhong Mai started getting excited. It was so rare that He Changdi needed their help with something. They had to do their best as caring older brothers and help solve his problems. Captain Gu adjusted his expression. Oh? Did your subordinate mention about his wife's current situation? He Changdi narrowed his eyes as he thought with a stiff expression. She's ignoring him, not cooking for him, and not speaking to him. Captain Gu became even more enthusiastic as he listened. They're a young couple, so it's normal to have a few quarrels. And it's typical for women to be slightly unreasonable. She might already be regretting it, but she's too thin-skinned and embarrassed to say anything. Right, a man should be thick-skinned. You need to take the initiative to apologize to her, then sway her with some sweet words. He Changdi frowned. He clearly had doubts with Captain Gu and Zhong Mai's suggestions. In his heart, Chu Lian wasn't a woman who liked to make a fuss without reason. Captain Gu noticed that there was still some suspicion on his face, so he gritted his teeth and revealed his ultimate trick. Listen to this old brother. If that still doesn't solve the problem, then work it out in bed. If one time doesn't work, then do it twice. Anyways, this trick is especially effective with your sister-in-law. Chapter 653, Hot Springs. 1. He Changdi. Captain Gu roughly patted He Changdi's ramrod straight back and tried to encourage him. That's just how marriage works. Look, I've been together with my wife for so many years, and we've even had this many kids, yet our relationship is stronger than ever. Listen to me, it'll work. These two old bastards were going overboard with their advice, so He Sanlang quickly stopped them. He said, all right, it's getting late, you should return to the area, brothers. Before leaving, Captain Gu and Zhong Mai reminded He Changdi to pass on their advice to his so-called subordinate. He Changdi's mouth twitched. Captain Gu and Zhong Mai were clearly doing that on purpose. The story about his subordinate was just a pretense, and everything referred to He Changdi himself. Chu Lian didn't attend the bonfire banquet. While those at the banquet were feasting, gambling, and partying, she had already gone to bed alone. Perhaps due to the many mishaps during this spring hunt, the original schedule had been considerably shortened. The Emperor's decree had already been passed down that afternoon. They would head back to the capital the next morning instead of staying an extra day as previously planned. On the way back, they would only make a stop at the imperial residence in Shangjing for a night, and everyone who participated in the hunt this time would be rewarded with a trip to the hot springs. Perhaps due to the fact that they were leaving the next day, the bonfire banquet was more lively than usual, but this was no longer of any concern to Chu Lian. It was only at midnight that the Emperor dismissed the banquet. He Changdi returned past midnight. He again went behind the screen to peek at Chu Lian before going to rest on the chaise outside. The next day, it took until late morning for the spring hunt party to prepare to leave. The imperial residence in Shangjing was only a short journey away, so there was no hurry. As He Changdi was considered a military official, he had to guard the emperor alongside the left military guards and the Yulin army. Therefore, he had been called away by He Lin's messenger early in the morning. Chu Lian hadn't seen him since she woke up. The last time she had spoken to him was when he had followed the emperor to the hunting grounds, so they hadn't spoken to each other for 2 whole days. Wenqing saw the dull expression on third young madam's face and sighed inwardly. She asked, "Third young madam, everything has been packed. Shall we set off?" Chu Lian scrubbed her cheeks and forced a smile. When she stood up, she had a dizzy spell, and felt as if the world was spinning. Wenqing was startled by this. She hastily caught hold of Chu Lian and asked, visibly anxious, "Third young madam, are you all right?" "Woozy." Chu Lian replied softly. Wenqing helped her back to her seat. Once she sat down, The dizziness subsided. Wenqing stroked her back soothingly. "Third young madam, shall I call for the female imperial physician?" The imperial physician that Sima Hui had sent to check on Chu Lian's well-being had just been sent back this morning. If Wenqing and Wenlan had known that Chu Lian wasn't feeling well, they wouldn't have sent the physician back. Chu Lian wasn't the type to stubbornly refuse treatment, so she waved her hand to tell Wenqing to get the physician. However, before Wenqing could leave the tent, there was news from the Yulin army to set off. The Yulin army's words were basically the same as an imperial edict. No one could disobey. Helpless, Wenqing turned back and informed Chu Lian of this. Chu Lian had no choice but to endure it for now. Luckily, the emperor had given permission for several injured members to travel back by carriage this time. This list included Chu Lian, Princess Liao, and Xiao Bojian. Enduring the dizzy feeling, Chu Lian had Wenqing and Wenlan support her onto the carriage. Once Chu Lian had settled down, Wenqing wanted to look for the female physician, but was stopped by Chu Lian. "The journey is pretty short. It can wait until we reach the imperial villa at Shangjing." The imperial physicians who came on the hunt had to ride on horses. They also had to pack their tools and medicines, so they were much busier than them. Wenlan covered Chu Lian's knees with a soft blanket, worry in her eyes as she asked, "Third young madam, will you be able to last till then?" Chu Lian smiled. "I'm already feeling a lot better. There shouldn't be a problem unless I stand for too long. Perhaps this happened because I ate too little over the last 2 days. Do we have any snacks? Bring me some." Wenqing quickly opened an exquisite, fragrant rosewood box and took out several intricately designed white porcelain plates from it. This servant expected third young madam to get hungry along the way, so this servant prepared your favorites, third young madam. The snacks displayed on the beautiful porcelain plates were shredded beef jerky, special dried anchovies, candied kumquats, and preserved peaches. Wenlan poured a cup of warm honey water from a silver pot and served it to Chu Lian. Chu Lian received it and took a sip, then glanced at the snacks placed on the table. In the end, she picked the slightly sour candied kumquats and preserved peaches. With the warm honey water filling her tummy and something delicious in her mouth, Chu Lian felt a lot better. Wenlan watched as Chu Lian ate the candied kumquats and preserved peaches and found it strange. The dried anchovies were usually third young madam's favorite. She could eat an entire dish without getting sick of it. Why wasn't she touching them at all today? However, she didn't voice her thoughts. She just silently watched as Chu Lian finished eating and stowed away the remaining snacks. The carriages that the emperor had sent specially for the injured were incredibly comfortable. Although they weren't big, they were lined with thick, soft carpets. The wooden walls of the carriage had also been covered with a soft fabric. Along with the relaxing incense inside, it was so comfortable that people could fall asleep easily. Halfway through, Changdi took great efforts to have someone swap shifts with him so that he could go over to the carriage. He wanted to speak with Chu Lian, but when he approached Wenqing and Wenlan, he learned that Chu Lian was asleep. Since his wife was asleep, he couldn't just rouse her for this. Chu Lian seemed to be taking naps very often over the past 2 days, which Sanlang found strange. He wondered if she was really that tired, or if she was just avoiding him. With a thread of helplessness and disappointment, Changdi continued riding his horse next to the carriage with a frosty expression, guarding Chu Lian's carriage for 30 minutes. TL note: surprise food porn. Dried beef jerky, dried anchovies, candied kumquats, preserved peaches. Chapter 654, Hot Springs, 2. As expected, the imperial residence in Shangjing wasn't far at all. They had departed in the morning, and they arrived in the middle of the afternoon. The attendants of the imperial residence had already received notification some time ago. They were aware that the emperor would bring the rest of the imperial family and officials from the spring hunt over to rest, so they had already arranged rooms for everyone on the list. Their dwellings were distributed according to their ranks. Marquis Anyuan was a second-ranked title, so the temporary courtyard they were assigned to would obviously be fitting of that title. The neighboring courtyards were for Lord Yang and Marquis Dingyuan. Once Chu Lian had settled down, Wenqing immediately set off to get the imperial physician. Chu Lian laid down on the bed, leaving only her left wrist free and uncovered. Physician Li gently grabbed her wrist and put 2 fingers on her pulse, spending quite some time to measure it. Physician Li thought for a bit, then took the pulse on Chu Lian's right wrist as well. Physician Li's brows drew together as she finally put down Chu Lian's wrist and sunk into deep thought. Wenqing became impatient from looking at the physician's expression. She asked, "Physician Li, how is our young madam?" After much deliberation, Physician Li found the pulse too light to make a decisive diagnosis, so she gave a safer answer instead. "Honored lady has been overly anxious over the past 2 days, and along with the shock she's received, she has a lack of both qi and blood now. There isn't any sickness in her body, all she needs is more nutrition to recover." Chu Lian felt silly now. So she was only feeling weak because of low blood sugar. Relief washed over Wenqing and Wenlan as they heard Physician Li's words. A sliver of a smile finally appeared on Wenqing's face. "Sorry for troubling you, Physician Li." Physician Li waved her hand in protest. "This is part of my duty. Honored lady, since you've come to Shangjing, perhaps you could consider going for a soak in the Imperial Residence's hot springs?" Chu Lian nodded with a smile, then had Wenqing see Physician Li out. The fact that Chu Lian had sent for the Imperial physician naturally couldn't be kept away from He Changdi. He Changdi once again strove to get some time away from his duties with the Emperor, and rushed to the courtyard Chu Lian was at. Physician Li had already returned to the area where the other Imperial physicians were resting. The physician who had come along for the spring hunt this time was the Imperial Physician Institute's Imperial Physician Sunday. Imperial Physician's son was in his 50s, and his family had all come from medical backgrounds. Currently, other than the director of the institute, he possessed the highest official position and status in the Imperial Physician Institute. He had great medical expertise and had ample experience. Although he wasn't a match for the legendary Great Dr. Miao, he was still a well-known physician. The field that Imperial Physician's son specialized in wasn't pediatrics, nor external or internal injuries. It was gynecology. He possessed the lauded title of the godly gynecologist. Physician Li was a female physician of great skill in the palace. She had also received pointers from Imperial Physician Sunday. Once she met up with Imperial Physician's son, she described Chu Lian's pulse in detail to him. "Uncle's son, Honored Lady Jeannie seems to have a slippery pulse. Do you think Honored Lady Jeannie is pregnant?" Physician Li couldn't confirm if this was the case, so she had chosen not to mention this to them earlier. Imperial Physician's son stopped what he was doing and stroked his white beard. "From what you described, there's a 70% chance that she's actually pregnant, but it could also be a symptom of her weakened body. You made the right choice with your diagnosis. As physicians of the Imperial Physician Institute, we shouldn't make rash claims without certainty. Even if Honored Lady Jeannie is pregnant, this isn't a good time to diagnose her condition. Just wait a few days, and we'll be able to confirm it." Physician Li nodded. She very much agreed with Imperial Physician's son's view. It was better to speak cautiously when treating royalty. If she claimed that Chu Lian was pregnant, everyone might become overjoyed, but if it turned out to be a mistake, the consequences would be terrible for her. It was always better to take the safe route for an Imperial physician. Marquis An Yuan wasn't someone she could provoke, with his lofty position. Furthermore, Honored Lady Jeannie was on good terms with a personage like Princess Wei. Thus, due to a combination of many factors, Chu Lian's pregnancy was temporarily kept a secret. When He Changdi hurried over, Physician Li was already long gone. There were only a couple of unfamiliar servants outside the room, who were maids of the Imperial residence. Wenqing and Wenlan were both inside the room. Lai Yu stayed outside as He Changdi walked in. His sharp eyes swept around the room, but all he saw was Wenqing and Wenlan who were cleaning up. "Where's your young madam?" He Changdi frowned and asked. Wenqing and Wenlan were feeling rather unhappy with He Changdi, but they didn't dare to show any disrespect to him. The two sisters bowed their heads and answered, "Third young madam has gone to the back to soak in the hot springs." He Changdi paused, then took off his cloak and handed it to Wenqing. He walked 2 steps over to a table and sat down. His voice was akin to frosty winds in their ears as he asked, "What happened? Why did you call for the female physician?" Wenqing reported every detail of the matter of Chu Lian feeling unwell to He Changdi. And what did physician Li say? Her diagnosis was that third young madam has suffered from too much worry and lacks qi and blood. Third young madam requires more nutrition to recover. With his memories of his previous life, He Changdi had no faith in the physicians from the palace, be they imperial or lady. He was worried about Chu Lian's well-being, so he had already concluded that he would have Great Dr. Miao give her a checkup once they returned. When did Liana go in? Wenqing estimated the time. It has been a while, approximately 30 minutes. He Changdi was worried that Chu Lian had lost consciousness from staying too long in the hot springs, so he took off his robe and entered the adjoining bathing hall where the hot springs were. Chapter 655. What a crappy suggestion. 1. As expected of the imperial family's holiday villa, they were not only situated at the mouth of the hot springs itself, the baths in the villa were extremely luxurious. This villa had been built in the previous dynasty with massive amounts of manpower and resources. However, this luxurious palace hadn't been completed for long before the previous dynasty came to an end, leaving the next dynasty to reap this unexpected benefit. He Hongdi lifted up the heavy blinds covering the entrance to the bath of the inner hall. Since the hot spring water came from the ground, there was a special sulphurous smell specific to hot springs lingering in the air. That heavy smell was further mixed with incense and flower fragrances, making it hard to breathe. He Changdi kept his footsteps light and silent. As he passed under the last set of blinds at the entrance, the slender figure in the wide oval bathing pool came into view. Chu Lian's nerves had been strung tight these 2 days thanks to the fall and the situation afterwards. It was a rare chance for her to visit a hot spring, and its waters did not disappoint. The warmth of the hot spring water surrounded her weary body and allowed her to relax completely. She sat at the side of the pool, where there was a specially carved curved platform to sit on. The water went up to her collarbone, leaving her fair, smooth shoulders open to the air. Her long, silky hair had been pinned up by a simple wooden hairpin, leaving 2 locks of hair to frame her lovely face. Those 2 long locks made a wavy trail where they touched the water, giving a touch of flair to the scene. Afraid that she would slip deeper into the pool, Chu Lian was resting her slender arms on the white jade steps behind her, which were covered by a thick carpet. One hand was placed upon the railing of the jade steps, the end of which was carved into the shape of a phoenix's head. The steam billowing up from the pool made her sleepy. She leaned her head on her forearm and shut her eyes as she laid partly on the carpet. This was the beautiful scene that greeted He Changdi when he entered the bathing area. Chu Lian was currently sitting with her back towards him. Half of her fair back was revealed to the open air, while the other half remained hidden under the steamy waters. Her delicate shoulder blades, so similar to butterfly wings and wet from the waters, reflected the dim glow of the lanterns. A few stray locks of hair trailed down from her long, elegant neck. 2 thin arms stretched out over the woolen carpet laid on the white jade steps. Her snow-white skin looked like exquisite porcelain against the dark crimson of the carpet. The Adam's apple on He Changdi's throat dipped as he gulped once. For some reason, Captain Guo and Zhong Mai's words rang through his head once more. His pupils dilated, and his entire body tensed up as his breathing became heavier. Wenqing and Wenlan were guarding the door outside, so Chu Lian wasn't expecting any intruders. The warmth of the waters had already lulled her into sleepiness, so she didn't notice that He Changdi had entered the hall and was standing by the pool. He Sanlang clenched his hands tightly and took a deep breath. He shut his eyes as he tried to suppress the desire that had flared up in his heart. He slowly walked over to Chu Lian as he battled fiercely with himself. 2 sides of him warred against each other, but finally, the evil side won over the good one. With a deft movement of his fingers, he took off his belt and tossed it to one side. It was quickly followed by his outer robe, which flew off to another corner. He Sanlang was left only in his inner clothes in a short moment. He entered the water from the other side of the pool. Chu Lian was leaning on the edge of the hot spring pool with her eyes shut, so she was completely unaware of his movements. While still in the middle of a daze from all the steam around her, Chu Lian suddenly felt a pair of strong arms hugging her from behind. Her slight body was pulled flush against a hard chest. One of He Changdis' arms reached around Chu Lian to grope the softness he loved the most, while the other slid down to the side of her waist and belly to stroke it gently. Chu Lian's eyes had already widened in alarm the moment she had been caught. The haze that had been hanging over her head dissipated at once, and she subconsciously thought of screaming and struggling. However, her head was turned to the side by the intruder and her tongue was immediately entwined with his before she could even draw up the wits to shout. All she could do was let out muffled protests. In the midst of her struggles, Chu Lian's almond-shaped eyes finally caught sight of the person who was attacking her. The sight of those familiar features made the tension in her thumping heart fade away. However, what came next wasn't happiness or excitement, but endless sadness and grievance. Since her mouth was still covered, all she could do was complain loudly in her own mind. How could He Changdi act this way? He had clearly been ignoring her for these few days and he hadn't even dared to meet her once. Yet he had now appeared without any warning and was bullying her. Did he know how scared she had been when a strange man's arms had been wrapped around her so suddenly? The combination of the lingering fear and those thoughts made the tears she had been holding back for so long spill out of her eyes. They rolled down her cheeks like strings of pearls. Chapter 656. What a crappy suggestion. 2. After fighting a cold war for so long, all that was He Sanlang's head was the desire to soothe his longing for Chu Lian. He continued pressing her down with his kisses. He used his tongue to explore her mouth, teasing her and entwining with her soft tongue. Her hot breath on his face, her light pants, they only fanned the flames in his heart. Just as he was immersed in her warmth, he suddenly tasted something strangely bitter. The hands teasing and roving over Chu Lian's body sensed a different kind of tension. He finally opened his eyes, only to be met with Chu Lian's tear-streaked face. The excitement and desire in He Changdis' eyes slowly ebbed away. He hadn't expected Chu Lian to react this way. He quickly let go of the soft and boneless figure in his arms. His voice carried some huskiness and heartache as he asked, "Liana, what's wrong?" Chu Lian was feeling especially wronged right now. Her almond-shaped eyes reflected both rage and grievance as she glared right at him. He Changdi felt completely helpless in the face of this. He tried to wipe away Chu Lian's tears with one hand. "It's all my fault, Liana. Please don't cry." The usually cool He Sanlang was terrible at comforting women. As much as he tried, all he could come up with was those two phrases. How could the fires raging in Chu Lian's heart be put out by those simple and thoughtless words? Disappointment radiated from her gaze and she pushed He Changdi away from her body. Of course, He Sanlang wasn't willing to let her go just yet. Chu Lian struggled even harder. In her extreme rage, she landed a slap on He Changdis' face. The crisp sound of that blow echoed in the wide halls of the bath. Chu Lian had put enough strength into her slap that a bright red mark in the shape of her palm quickly surfaced on one half of He Changdis' handsome face. Taking advantage of He Changdis' momentary daze, Chu Lian slipped out of his arms. She quickly climbed out of the pool, snatched up her nightgown off the privacy screen and pulled it on, and ran out of the bathing area barefoot. Leaving behind a stunned He Changdi alone in the steaming hot spring pool. After a long moment, He Sanlang broke out of his statue-like pose to look after where Chu Lian had disappeared. He let out a long sigh and let his body crumple against the wall of the pool. He shut his eyes again. In his mind, the image of Chu Lian's angry, aggrieved, tearful and pitiful expression haunted him. Damn it. He really was a scoundrel. He deserved this slap. He Changdi covered his eyes and thought carefully back to all that had happened the past few days. If He Sanlang refused to reflect even at this point, then he would really be brainless. Xiaobo Jian's plans, Imperial Princess Leiao's little plot, feudal Princess Anmin pushing things alone, as well as Sixth Prince, who was likely to be the mastermind behind this all. All these were easy enough to figure out, but it was only the Emperor's abnormal attention and caring for Chu Lian that left him befuddled. The expression on He Sanlang's face turned even more grave. He had a feeling that there were some secrets he hadn't been able to find out in his previous life, and that those very secrets would somehow implicate him in some way in this life. The moment He Changdi had straightened out his thoughts, the haze over his mind cleared up. When he recalled his earlier actions, He Changdi scrubbed furiously at his face. Damn Captain Guo and Zhong Mai. Their advice wasn't helpful at all. He had to find a chance to take revenge on them. Chu Lian had already left in a fury, so He Changdi didn't have any more desire to soak in the hot springs. He left the pool and changed into a dry set of clothes before leaving the hall. He looked out into the hall, where Chu Lian was nowhere to be found. He Changdi. His icy gaze swept over to the maidservant standing guard nearby, who couldn't help but tremble under his watch. Replying to third young master, third young madam took Wenqing and Wenlan over to Royal Princess Duanjia's. Third young madam has informed this servant that she will be staying with Royal Princess Duanjia tonight. Third young master doesn't have to wait for her. She asked third young master to sleep earlier. Faced with He Changdi's dangerous gaze, the maidservant finished her report while stuttering. He Changdi didn't say anything in reply. The storm on his face simply turned even darker. He changed into another set of clothes and headed for Prince Weiss Hall. However, he was stopped by Prince Weiss' manservant at the entrance. The manservant smiled kindly. Marquis An Yuan, this servant apologizes greatly for the inconvenience. Their Highnesses have already settled down for the night. If my lord has any business at hand, please wait for the next morning. There were other guards at the entrance and Prince Weiss' status was special. He Changdi couldn't enter by force. He could only stay at the entrance. When the manservant saw that He Changdi still stood there silently with a cold expression, he tried to persuade him. Marquis An Yuan, please rest assured. Her Highness treats honored Lady Jeannie as her own daughter. How could honored lady suffer any bit of mistreatment here with Her Highness? Honored lady will return to you without a single hair missing. It's getting late, Marquis An Yuan should head back to rest. He Changdi continued standing there with his hands behind his back in his black robes, as if the manservant hadn't spoken at all. The manservant had no other way to deal with this stubborn marquis. Well, if that's what you want. This servant won't bother with you. After saying so, the manservant waved at the guards. The crimson gates of the courtyard were quickly shut, leaving He Changdi outside. The remaining two guards outside didn't even glance at He Changdi and stood at their posts with ramrod-straight backs, looking like a pair of statues. After a moment, the gates didn't open again and the inside was as quiet as could be. Lai Yu couldn't bear seeing the situation like this and tried to coax his master. Third young master, why don't we head back? Nothing will happen to third young madam here. We still have a long journey to the capital tomorrow, and you still have to accompany the emperor. He Changdi turned his head slightly to look at Lai Yu. Following that, he pressed his thin lips together and waved his hand at Lai Yu, clearly ordering him to return to their hall first. Lai Yu knew that he hadn't succeeded at all. His third young master was a stubborn one. There was no swaying him at this point. However, as He Changdi's manservant, he couldn't really just head back by himself. He couldn't sit back and relax while his master was suffering. Thus, he resigned himself to his fate and stood in front of Prince Weiss dwelling with He Changdi. They had only been standing there for an hour, when a sudden bolt of lightning and roll of thunder announced the start of a thunderstorm. Heavy rain started pouring in the darkness of the night. Chapter 657, Playing Pitiful, 1. Within a side room in the courtyard, Chu Lian was about to lie in bed under Wenqing's careful attendance. She had been feeling tired throughout the day, and had even received a surprise assault from He Changdi in the night. Her mind had been on edge the whole day. Now that she finally got to relax, the exhaustion piled up upon her. However, the moment she laid down, there was the sound of thunder, and then came the pattering sound of rain. Chu Lian stared blankly at the ceiling. She blinked her almond-shaped eyes several times, then pulled up the blanket to cover her ears in an attempt to isolate herself from the annoying sound of rainfall. Wenqing stood to one side, contemplating whether to speak or not. She had already received news of third young master coming over and waiting outside the gates. It was evident that Prince and Princess Wei had no intention of keeping He Changdi's actions from Chu Lian. The final say was left to Chu Lian. Even though Wenqing was concerned about the well-being of her master, as a mere servant, it wasn't her place to say anything. Chu Lian reached out and made a gesture for Wenqing to go and said, "You've worked hard today, go get some rest too." Wenqing sighed inwardly. The quarrel between third young madam and third young master must be really bad this time. Even at this point in their relationship, there were still obstacles between the two of them. This servant will retreat for now. This servant will have a rest on the chaise right outside. Please call for this servant if you need anything, third young madam. Once Wenqing's footsteps faded away, Chu Lian pulled down the blanket covering her face. As she looked at the peaceful turquoise-colored canopy, her mind was filled with chaotic thoughts. She forced her eyes shut, but the sounds of the pattering rain and cracking thunder pierced her ears, and felt like hammers slamming down on her heart. Chu Lian tossed and turned, but she just couldn't fall asleep. All that was on her mind were the words reported by a servant who had come by earlier. "Honored lady, Marquis Anyuan has come over looking for you. The princess ordered the guards to stop him from entering and the guards have advised him to leave, but it doesn't seem like Marquis Anyuan intends to do so. He has been standing at the entrance for an hour. Do you have any orders?" It had never occurred to Chu Lian that it would rain tonight, and that it would be such a heavy downpour. That lunatic He Sanlang wouldn't actually be so silly to stand in front of the gate all night, right? At the entrance, there were only small eaves hanging over the door to protect people from the rain. Wouldn't he already be soaked by now? It was already spring, and summer would soon come, but it was still easy to fall ill by staying out in the rain like this. Even though they had great Dr. Miao, the Great Wu dynasty wasn't like the modern times. They didn't have any advanced medical equipment. Thus, even the smallest cold could end up taking a person's life. Chu Lian's thoughts went wild. The more she thought about it, the more uneasy she became. The maidservant had said that Lai Yu was there as well. That fellow wouldn't just stand there and watch his master get soaked, right? He Sanlang would have to stay by His Majesty's side as a guard the next morning as well. After tossing and turning restlessly in bed for another 15 minutes, Chu Lian couldn't continue lying down anymore. She got up and listened to the pouring rain, praying that it would lighten up, but the heavens paid no heed to her wishes. The rain outside didn't get any softer at all, and was even getting louder instead. Chu Lian finally had enough, and shouted for Wenqing who was resting outside. Wenqing quickly entered. From her attire, it was obvious that she hadn't gone to rest at all. Chu Lian gripped the blanket tightly with both hands, took a deep breath, then ordered, "Wenqing, go to the entrance and check if he has left." Wenqing's eyes brightened up. She quickly answered in the affirmative and bowed to Chu Lian, then immediately walked off to complete the task. Chu Lian watched as Wenqing left impatiently, and sighed. They had probably guessed that she would be too soft-hearted to ignore this situation. Oh well, what's done is done. She had never had the heart to watch He Changdi suffer anyway. At the entrance, the originally suave and charismatic He Sanlang was now so soaked that he looked like a drowned rat. The 2 locks of hair framing his face were now stuck to his face due to the rain, and drops of rain were streaking down his stubborn expression and dripping from his chin. He raised one hand to wipe away the rainwater on his face. He maintained a frosty expression in the pouring rain, but his back was straighter than ever. Even the 2 guards couldn't bear to watch him do this to himself. "Marquis, please come over here for cover. The spring rain is chilly, and it will be easy to fall ill if Marquis stays there." He Changdi didn't move an inch. It was as if the 2 guards didn't even exist. The 2 guards were at a loss for what to do, so they secretly had someone report this to the higher-ups. Unexpectedly, the servant who went to pass the message returned and told them to leave Marquis Anyuan alone. As long as honored Lady Jeannie remained silent, this would be none of their concern even if he stood there overnight. The 2 guards looked at each other, and had no choice but to keep their mouths shut. Lai Yu was standing there holding 2 umbrellas and was incredibly anxious as well. He was completely soaked, and he had tried to persuade third young master to take an umbrella or go back for now, but He Changdi stayed unmoving like a stone statue. Like a fool, Lai Yu held the umbrellas without opening them, and accompanied his crazy master in front of the entrance. If it wasn't for the fact that these guards refused to let him enter as well, he would have already gone in to look for third young madam with tears in his eyes. Right as Lai Yu was falling into a daze, he caught sight of someone in his peripheral vision. It was a familiar figure to him. He abruptly raised his head, and his eyes met with Wenqing's searching gaze. His eyes immediately brightened up, and he waved at Wenqing from outside the courtyard like an idiot. His smile was so wide that it revealed all of his white teeth. Wenqing served third young madam personally. Since she had come here at this time, it had to be by third young madam's order. It seemed like third young master hadn't gotten soaked for nothing. The rainbow comes after the storm. This had truly been an arduous mission. Wenqing glared at him, then shifted her gaze to He Changdi. She sized him up, then turned away and left quickly. Liu moved closer to He Changdi, and said with a silly smile on his face, "Third young master, did you see who that was?" It was Wenqing. He Changdi sent a chilly gaze at him, and Liu immediately curbed his smile and shut his mouth. Chapter 659, Playing Pitiful, 2. Wenqing narrated what she had seen in full detail to Chu Lian. Chu Lian sat by the bed, a little stunned. The dim yellow candle light shone on the side of her face, making her small face seem even paler. As Wenqing didn't hear any reply from Chu Lian, she had to probe again. "Third young madam, what should we do?" Chu Lian sighed softly. "Wenqing, take him to the opposite room, and have Wenlan get him a clean set of clothes." "Okay, I'm going to sleep now, don't disturb me unless it's for something important." Wenqing felt a burst of joy inside. Although the majority of the blame for the couple's fight fell upon third young master this time and she wanted to get justice for third young madam as well, the men were still the ones who held power in the Great Wu dynasty. If the relationship between husband and wife deteriorated, Chu Lian would always be on the losing side as the wife. Wenqing personally went out and conveyed Chu Lian's words to third young master. This time, He Changdi managed to enter the courtyard smoothly, and changed into clean, dry clothes in the room beside Chu Lian's. He wanted to go take a look at Chu Lian, but Wenlan informed him that third young madam had already gone to sleep. On the other side, the lights were still on in Royal Princess Duanjia's room. A maidservant was standing beside her and softly reporting something to her. Once she heard all of it, Royal Princess Duanjia pouted, and gestured for the maid to leave. When she was the only one left inside the room, a tall and burly figure appeared from behind a screen. He Changjue walked over to the table and sat down. "Third brother and third sister-in-law have always had a good relationship. Why are they suddenly fighting?" Royal Princess Duanjia rolled her eyes without any care for her image. "Honestly, your brother's heart is like a blob of corniness. Getting soaked in the rain? He obviously did that on purpose. That silly Chu Liu would probably let everything go after he coaxes her a little." He Changjue awkwardly coughed. "Sanlang isn't he as bad as you think, he just really loves his wife." "Bullshit. Who even shows their love for their wife like this? And is he blind or something? Has been so close to that damned brat Liao." He Changjue stiffened up as he was unable to refute that. Royal Princess Duanjia suddenly turned her head and glared at He Changjue, then pointed her finger right in his face. "If you dare to treat me like this in the future, I'll immediately divorce you." He Changju's face immediately turned black. The next day, everyone was preparing to return to the capital early in the morning. As He Changdi had to stay by the emperor's side as a guard, he had already gotten up before dawn. Before he left, he stood in front of Chu Lian's window for 15 minutes, and finally left while suppressing his coughs. When Chu Lian got up, He Changdi was already long gone. She endured the urge to ask about He Changdi's condition. However, her complexion seemed to have greatly improved after a proper night's rest. Once everything was packed, they boarded the carriage. Only an hour through the journey back to the capital, someone knocked on the window of the carriage. Wenlan raised the curtain of the carriage. Seeing the person outside the carriage, she greeted, "Good morning, General Sima. Have you come to look for our third young madam?" Sima Hui was riding on a snow-white horse. Looking incredibly suave in her martial attire, she nodded towards Wenlan with a smile. A few moments later, Wenqing and Wenlan stepped off the carriage and got onto horses instead, leaving the space in the carriage for Chu Lian and Sima Hui. The moment Sima Hui entered the carriage, she looked around the spacious carriage and touched the decor in the carriage. A smile surfaced on her lips as she said, "As expected of the imperial family's carriage. If I hadn't known beforehand, I would have thought that the person riding in this carriage was a prince or princess. Chu Lian gave her a look of disdain. This is a carriage granted by the emperor himself, of course it would be high quality. Sima Hui laughed. That's where you're wrong. The one that Xiao Bojian is riding in isn't as good as this one. Sister Hui, have you come here just to make fun of me? Alright, I'll stop joking with you. Seeing Sima Hui's serious expression, Chu Lian set aside the smile on her face. With clear eyes and a slight frown, she asked, what is it? Sima Hui sat right next to her, and coughed twice awkwardly. Liana, just what happened between you and He Sanlang? Chu Lian. Right now, Chu Lian truly wished that she could find a hole and bury her head inside it. Why was it that this insignificant matter between her and her husband was known to everyone around them? After coming to her tent for a free meal on the first day, Sima Hui had stayed by the emperor's side with the other military officials. The two hadn't even seen each other until now, yet Sima Hui had still caught wind of this. The corner of Chu Lian's mouth twitched. Only one possibility came to mind. Was it fourth prince who told you about it? Prince Jin was the lunatic He Changdis' best friend. If he needed to confide in someone about this, Prince Jin would be his first choice. Chapter 659. Let me lean on you. 1. Sima Hui smiled and didn't deny it. After spending some time together in the north, Sima Hui had gotten some understanding of Chu Lian's personality. She didn't continue pressing Chu Lian about her relationship with her husband and turned the conversation elsewhere. Liana, I wasn't trying to pry. I'm just a messenger sent from fourth prince, here to inform you of some facts. Chu Lian turned a confused look on Sima Hui. Facts? When Sima Hui noticed the dazed look on Chu Lian's cute little face, she knew instantly that her silly friend wasn't in the know. She sighed inwardly, cursing at He Changdi in her mind for keeping everything hidden from his wife. That man had suppressed all his bitterness and hatred in his heart. If not for this special situation and Prince Jin's inside knowledge, then this couple's relationship might really have gone beyond the point of repair. The silver mine that He Changdi and Prince Jin have been hiding at the north is being investigated. Chu Lian's eyes widened in disbelief. Was she joking? A silver mine? The discovery of any silver mines had to be reported to the court immediately so that the Ministry of Revenue could make an official report of it to the emperor. The emperor himself would then order the cabinet to pick a few suitable officials to lead a team to develop the mine. The law here was that no one could develop mines on their own, even the princes. He Changdi was way too bold. He actually developed a private mine of his own with Prince Jin. Thinking back to when they were in the north and how He Changdis' subordinates had kept disappearing, a chill sprung up in Chu Lian's heart. It was her fault for not reading the story to the end and not finding out if there was anything information related to the silver mine. No wonder he had been so generous with his money that time. He had bought her accessories and even that storefront. When she had asked, all he had said that the money was his and that he had gotten it through legitimate means that had to be kept secret. Well, now she knew exactly what it had to be kept secret. That money had come from the silver in his illegal mine. If the emperor really wanted to pursue the matter, he could definitely mete out a heavy punishment. Taking away his official position as well as his noble rank were all within expectations. Does His Majesty know? A tremor had developed in Chu Lian's voice when she spoke. Sima Hui nodded gravely. His Majesty found out right before the spring hunt. Chu Lian immediately realized how serious the matter was. Her own expression took a turn for the worse. And, Imperial concubine Wei knows about this matter as well. Sima Hui calmly added on a bombshell that gave Chu Lian the urge to fall to the ground. Chu Lian couldn't hold back her gasp. But you don't have to worry too much. Prince Jin and Marquis Anyuan have already controlled any news leaking about this matter and there aren't many who know about it. His Majesty has also quietly given them permission to hand over the silver mine to the court through the proper channels instead. Prince Jin was still the emperor's flesh and blood after all. Although this incident had turned the emperor's impression of him towards the negative, the benefits brought to the country by discovering a new silver mine were enough to grant him some merit for the achievement, enough for the emperor to overlook his mistake. Chu Lian suddenly thought back to the morning she had seen He Changdi accompanying Imperial Princess Liao. Sima Hui seemed to have guessed at her train of thought. Marquis An Yuan has been accompanying Princess Liao for the past 2 days, partly because of the Emperor's order, as well as due to Imperial concubine Wei's threats. Imperial Princess Liao got crippled because of her own reckless actions. Unfortunately, because Marquis An Yuan was nearby when it happened, Imperial concubine Wei feels that it was Marquis An Yuan's fault for not saving her in time. Chu Lian's eyes opened wide. She really couldn't believe what she was hearing. There were so many reasons behind his cold behavior towards her the past few days. Why didn't he Changdi talk to her? When she wanted to open her heart to him, he had kept avoiding her. As if she were some scary beast. Sima Hui noticed that Chu Lian had lowered her head and closed her eyes. Her lips were pressed tightly together. The general knew that her friend had taken her words to heart. All right, I'm not going to say anything else. The rest is between you and your husband. If you have the time, go and have a good chat with him. Sima Hui stroked Chu Lian's smooth hair before lifting the curtain entrance of the carriage and jumping straight out, landing on her mount smoothly. She wielded her horse whip gracefully, and her horse shot forward to join the rest of the military officials further in front. When the spring hunt party passed the gates of the capital, they each returned to their own estates. Only a few officials still had to follow behind the emperor and enter the palace for further orders. Chu Lian was intending to wait at Xuanwu Gate for He Changdi so that they could return home together. Unfortunately, Lai Yu came out with a special message from He Changdi, telling her to head home first. Chu Lian thought it over for a moment before shooting a look at Lai Yu, who was waiting respectfully at the side. Instead of instructing the driver or the guards to move, she started questioning He Changdi's manservant. Where did you go last night? Lai Yu looked up in shock over the question, but quickly lowered his head again to hide the flash of panic in his eyes. He tried his best to calm down and answered, replying to third young madam, this servant didn't go anywhere, this servant went to sleep the moment it got dark. The usual soft and watery gaze in Chu Lian's eyes was gone, replaced by a frigid glare that could rival her husband's. When it landed on Lei Yu's frame, he couldn't bear the pressure and started trembling uncontrollably. Lei Yu's head shrunk even lower. Chu Lian didn't continue speaking and simply continued looking at him. Chapter 660, Let Me Lean on You. 2. Finally, Lai Yu broke under the weight of her gaze and spoke the truth. Third young madam, this servant deserves death for lying to you. However, third young master already gave me an order. Last night, this servant and third young master went into the forest to pick medicinal herbs. It wasn't until midnight that we finally found all the ingredients that Imperial concubine Wei needed. What? Chu Lian stared at Lai Yu in shock, her almond-shaped eyes even wider than usual. Lai Yu thought that Chu Lian didn't believe his words. He pleaded with a sincere and put-out tone, third young madam, this servant is speaking the truth this time. If this servant lies, then this servant will never. All right, I heard you. I believe you. Chu Lian cut off his vow and let down the curtain covering the carriage entrance. She settled back into her seat in the carriage. Imperial concubine Wei. Chu Lian was all puffed up with anger. That woman actually dared to bully her man, that lunatic He Changdi. He was clearly just a fool. He was so stupid to actually agree to such a ridiculous demand too. Oh, she was so angry. Although Lai Yu could sense that third young madam was angry, the carriage remained stationary outside of the palace gates. Did this mean that third young madam was going to wait for third young master to be done? Lei Yi perked up. While third young master and madam had been fighting, he had been the one who suffered the most. Even he thought himself pitiful. He Changdi stood with his back ramrod straight as he strode quickly down the white jade steps of the palace. His face was ashen. His healthy pink lips were now white and peeling. He would also let out a low cough from time to time. It was clear that he had fallen sick. However, his icy aura and cold demeanor lent a hint of beauty even to his ill pallor. While walking along the path to Xuanwu Gate, he kept his gaze lowered. It wasn't until he reached the gates that he looked up, only to see a familiar carriage stopped right outside the palace gates, with Lai Yu and the estate's guards standing next to it. He Changdi's eyes lit up. two sparks of light shining steadfastly in the depths of the darkness. The heart he had encased in ice suddenly melted, as if wrapped in a cocoon of warmth, giving him the urge to sigh from the comfort. Unknowingly, his steps underneath him quickened. Lai Yu seemed to have spotted him from afar. Since Lai Yu couldn't pass through the palace gates at this time, he stood where he was and waved at Changdi. For Changdi, it was as if the clouds had parted, letting the sun shine brightly in his heart once again. He didn't mind Lai Yu's silly grin for once and walked over to his manservant in a rare good mood. Once he stepped out of the palace gates, Lai Yu grinned at him and said, "Third young master, you've finally come out of the palace. Third young madam has been waiting for you for close to 2 hours." The spark in Changdi's eyes was still resplendent. His expression was as cool as ever, like an icy mountain, and his tone was calm as he instructed Lai Yu, "After I board the carriage, tell them to return to the estate." Lai Yu complied with a smile. Changdi immediately turned and got onto the carriage after that order. There was only Chu Lian left in the carriage now. Wenqing and Wenlan seemed to have guessed that he would sit in the carriage with Chu Lian on the way back, so they had gone out and would be returning on horses instead. Chu Lian was lying on her side on the long bench of the carriage. The bench had been covered in a thick and fluffy fleece carpet. An exquisite coral fleece blanket had been draped over her body. Even in her sleep, her brow was furrowed, showing how badly she slept. Changdi made it to her side in 2 steps and sat down beside her. He reached out and hugged her tightly, pulling her to sit on his lap with her head resting on his broad shoulders. Chu Lian hadn't been sleeping too deeply, so she was woken by his movements. For some reason, waking up in this position in his embrace and seeing his pale face close up brought a pang of heartache. Tears gathered in Chu Lian's eyes and started falling. Chu Lian returned his embrace with arms around his neck as she wiped at her tears with one hand. She was a little frustrated with herself. What was going on with her mood? Why was she crying for no reason? She had never been a crybaby. Changdi's heart had already been aching for his wife ever since the day he had seen her with tear tracks on her face. Now that she was crying right in front of him, his heart ached even more. He lifted her chin with one hand and bent down to kiss the teardrops off her face. He followed the flow of her tears up to the wet corners of her eyes. "Liana, don't cry, it's all my fault." He didn't know how to comfort others. All he could do was to repeat those 2 lines. However, the emotion in his voice held a miraculous power that somehow helped to calm Chu Lian down. Under his gentle reassurance, her tears quickly stopped flowing. Chu Lian sniffled pitifully and tightened her hold around Changdi's neck, pressing her face into his chest. Changdi called out gently, "Liana? Changdi, let me lean on you for a while. I don't want to talk right now." Chu Lian's voice was all muffled, while she was buried in his chest. Thus, Sanlang pressed his lips together and kept his right arm around her waist, while he used his other hand to stroke her soothingly on her back. He looked as if he were comforting a child who was feeling wronged. The carriage started moving slowly. Changdi didn't speak and simply kissed the top of Chu Lian's head from time to time, enjoying the familiar sensation of his wife in his arms and her enchanting scent. Chu Lian hid in the safety of his chest for a long while before finally lifting up her head and looking at Changdi. She could tell that he hadn't been very well for the past 2 days. Stubble was growing on his chin and his lips were peeling. There were also dark eye circles under his eyes now. Chu Lian couldn't resist the urge to kiss him, so she reached up a little and kissed his coarse chin. His stubble was all prickly under her soft lips, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was just special. Changdi started for a bit from Chu Lian's sudden action, and his body froze up for 2 seconds. Slowly after that, life started returning to his eyes and he met her gaze steadily without blinking, as if he were scared that she would disappear if he blinked. Chapter 661, Pregnant, 1. Chu Lian felt uncomfortable under his direct gaze. Her face flushed instantly and she turned her head away to avoid his eyes, but Changdi caught hold of her chin and started raining kisses on her. He started at the corner of her lips, then sucked on her full bottom lip and nibbled on it. Just as he was about to push deeper into her mouth, He Changdi seemed to recall something and quickly let go of Chu Lian. Still immersed in the steamy bout of affection, Chu Lian couldn't make sense of what happened. Her originally bashful eyes fluttered open and she turned her confused and misty gaze upon He Changdi. He Changdi's heart softened and he stroked her smooth and reddened cheeks lovingly. "I have a cold, I'm afraid I'll pass it to you." It was then that Chu Lian found out why he had suddenly moved away. She pressed her pink lips together. Using He Changdi's momentary distraction, she raised her body and attacked his thin and slightly pale lips. Her little lithe tongue reached into his mouth, twisting around in exploration. He Changdi stiffened up at the intrusion as the desire in his eyes thickened. The thirst he had tried to resist was back in full force thanks to Chu Lian's simple gesture. As he delved deeper into their kiss, He Changdi heard the woman in his arms speaking in a slightly muffled voice, "I'm not afraid of a cold." A corner of his lips hooked up in a smile as he turned the tables on his invader and completely dominated her mouth in return. Their battle continued until Chu Lian was gasping for breath. He Changdi loosened his hold on her a little. Her sweet and fragrant breath was puffing out over his nose. He continuously placed tiny kisses at the corners of her mouth and cheek. Chu Lian took a breather as she laid bonelessly against He Changdi's shoulders. It took some time before the flush on her cheeks faded away. Neither of them broke the silence. Instead, they took comfort from leaning on each other. It wasn't long before Chu Lian dozed off, still leaning against He Changdi. By the time their carriage reached the Arnuen estate, darkness was already falling outside. Seeing that Chu Lian was still sleeping soundly in his arms, He Changdi couldn't bear to wake her. He wrapped her up tightly in his cloak and carried her into the estate. Even before they had reached the main courtyard they shared, Chu Lian had already woken up. However, thanks to He Changdi's bold actions, she was too shy to open her eyes and continued feigning sleep. The main courtyard of their new estate was still called Songtao Court. Once He Changdi entered their courtyard, he ordered the servants to call for Great Dr. Miao. While Chu Lian had been in the pink of health initially, she had suffered some damage on the trip to the north. It had taken a period of nourishment in order to get her health back to normal. This time, she had also suffered some fright at the hunting grounds. Although the imperial physicians had given her a clean bill of health, He Sanlang was still worried for her. Thus, he asked for Great Dr. Miao to look at Chu Lian the moment they were home. Since they had moved out of the Jinggan estate, Great Dr. Miao had followed them to the Arnuen estate. Chu Lian had arranged for Great Dr. Miao to have his own courtyard and even a special medicine room. At his age, Great Dr. Miao didn't have much that he was interested in, aside from medicine and good food. With the small and simple family of House Arnuen and Chu Lian's cooking, the Arnuen estate was the ideal living space for Great Dr. Miao. Thus, Great Dr. Miao was rather grateful to the couple. When He Changdi requested his presence, he came quickly. Chu Lian woke up when she arrived back at Songtao Court. Since the ones serving in Songtao Court were all her close servants, she didn't have anything to be embarrassed about around them. She gave a slight cough to hide the awkwardness remaining on her face. "When Uncle Miao comes over later, let him check your pulse." The eternal ice on He Changdi's face seemed to have melted away completely. There was a slight smirk on his face and he simply nodded in reply to her request without any contest. Senior servant Gui had already taken Jingyan and Wenlan with her to the kitchen to cook dinner. Great Dr. Miao was still strong and healthy despite his age, and he arrived at Songtao Court with his medicine box in no time. The moment he entered the parlor, he saw Chu Lian and He Changdi sitting at the head of the room. His first reaction was to give them a glare and admonish them lightly. "What did you do to yourselves? Wasn't it supposed to be a simple trip out? Look at what's happened to you both. Others might think that you've gone to battle instead of just hunting." The couple had been around Great Dr. Miao for some time now, so they treated him like a senior member of their family. When Great Dr. Miao reprimanded them like this, all they could do was smile sheepishly back. Great Dr. Miao set his medicine box on the table and sat down with an air of authority. He faced the couple and asked, "Who's first?" Chu Lian turned to look at He Changdi, who took the hint and walked over to Great Dr. Miao's side. Great Dr. Miao took up his hand and remained silent as he read He Changdi's pulse. After a short while, he spoke up, It's nothing major. You caught a cold from the cold weather because your body wasn't in the best condition. You tired yourself out and put stress on your body by worrying too much. Just have a good night's rest and take some medicine and you'll be fine." After saying that, Great Dr. Meow turned his attention to Chu Lian. "Now, how about you? How did you get yourself into this state? I just got you back to good health and this is how you repay me." Chu Lian lowered her head in shame from the doctor's scolding. He Changdi quickly tried to defend his wife. "Uncle Meow, it's all my fault, don't scold Liana." Great Dr. Meow harumphed. "Aren't you going to come here?" He Changdi vacated his seat next to Great Dr. Meow, and Chu Lian stood up and sat in He Changdi's place. She extended a fair wrist and placed it on the handkerchief on the table. Great Dr. Meow focused on reading her pulse. Suddenly, he frowned and pressed harder on Chu Lian's wrist. It took him much longer to read her pulse than he had for He Changdi. He continued checking her pulse for 8 whole minutes and even checked both of her wrists. He Changdi noticed the grave expression on his face. His heart leaped in alarm. He could barely wait for Great Dr. Meow to finish reading Chu Lian's pulse before he asked, "Uncle Meow, did something happen to Liana?" Chu Lian hadn't thought much of the long diagnosis. She hadn't had much appetite these 2 days and was a little giddy sometimes. To her, it seemed like the symptoms of low blood sugar. She had eaten more according to what physician Li had recommended and the symptoms had mostly disappeared. However, Great Dr. Meow was a genius in the medical field, so she started feeling uneasy from how serious he had turned. Chapter 662, Pregnant, 2. Seeing how worriedly the young couple was looking at him, Great Dr. Meow's expression relaxed. "Did the imperial physician prescribe you any medicine, and did you eat it?" Chu Lian explained what had happened to her in the arena at the hunting grounds. "Physician Ju and Li checked on my health, but I didn't drink any medicine. I only had some normal nourishing soup." Hearing that Chu Lian had fallen off her horse, Great Dr. Meow's eyes widened as far as they could go. However, after hearing that she hadn't taken any medicine, he heaved a sigh of relief. Those sly imperial physicians. The old foxes must have suspected that Chu Lian was pregnant, but they likely hadn't been able to diagnose it properly, so they must have avoided prescribing any medicine for their own safety. "The two of you are seriously muddle-headed." Great Dr. Meow pointed a shaking finger at the couple in his anger. He turned to look at the servants standing behind Chu Lian and He Changdi and lamented, "Ah, what a useless group of people." Chu Lian was shocked by Great Dr. Meow's sudden change in mood. What was going on? Faced by all the dazed and confused faces around him, Great Dr. Meow just couldn't keep his temper up. He stopped beating around the bush and stated, "Liana is already 1 month pregnant. Thank your lucky stars. If you continue being so clumsy, you might have lost the child." "What?" The sudden announcement from Great Dr. Meow made everyone dumbfounded and lost for words. The most exaggerated reaction came from He Changdi. He completely lost his usual cool and stiff facade as a myriad of emotions blossomed into life on his face. Chu Lian was stiff with shock. She looked down dazedly at her flat abdomen. So there was already a new life growing in there without her knowing. She subconsciously reached out to stroke her abdomen. Even if she couldn't feel any change, Chu Lian still thought that something was different. He Changdi turned to stare at Chu Lian. There were too many emotions in his eyes to name, but slowly, joy surfaced up and shone in his gaze. He pulled Chu Lian into his embrace without caring for their audience, hugging Chu Lian around her narrow waist and stroking Chu Lian's smooth hair tenderly. He mumbled, "Liana, we have a child." In his past life, He Changdi had never consummated his marriage with Chu Lian. Later on, when House Jingan had fallen and he had been exiled, his very survival had been a problem out in the bitter north. With revenge on his mind, he hadn't had the time to consider relationships with women. Thus, this child was his very first. Now that he was going to become a father for the first time, and the person who was going to bear the next generation for him was a woman he deeply loved, the last bits of ice locking his heart fully melted away. The servants, senior servant Zhong and Xian included amongst them, finally reacted to the news. Joy shone from all of their faces. Senior Servant Zhong's eyes couldn't even be seen from how widely she was beaming. Great Dr. Miao harumphed, "Don't get too happy yet. Tell me, did you hear what I just said?" He Changdi and Chu Lian's hearts thumped in unison. There was extreme worry in He Changdi's expression. "Uncle Miao, how is Liana's body now?" Chu Lian looked up at Great Dr. Miao with uncertainty on her face. This was her first ever child as well. She wanted to protect her child with all her might. The little sprout was the product of the love between her and He Changdi, a living testament to the depth of their feelings and promise to each other. Great Dr. Miao was pretty helpless in the face of their worry. He could only try to empathize with them since they were going to be parents for the first time. He explained everything to them in detail patiently. "From what I can tell, the fetus is in a stable condition. However, don't be so rash as you were last time. Liana's body isn't in the best of health now. Before the pregnancy is stable, stay in the estate and be careful." Great Dr. Miao's words were like an imperial decree, from the way everyone present was listening intently. Before Great Dr. Miao left, he specially called out to He Changdi. "Zhixiang, come with me. I have some instructions for you." He Changdi didn't dare to tarry and quickly followed after Great Dr. Miao out of the room. Now it was only Chu Lian and her servants left in the parlor. When she looked up and around the circle of servants, all she could see was happiness and elation on their faces. The corners of her mouth couldn't help lifting in a smile. Senior Servant Zhong stood at the lead of the group of maidservants as they bobbed in respect towards Chu Lian in unison. The old servant's eyes were still upturned crescents as she said, "Congratulations, third young madam. Our estate is about to have a new heir." The people in this era tended to favor males more, so Chu Lian didn't correct the senior servant's words. She simply smiled again and told them to stand. When Chu Lian stood up, wanting to return to her bedroom to change, Xian immediately rushed over to support her. Chu Lian didn't know whether to laugh or cry at her action. She glared at Xian. Why did she feel that she had suddenly become someone who couldn't even walk properly in the eyes of her servants? The child in her belly was likely only a fertilized egg at this point. "Shu, I can walk by myself. You're making a mountain out of a molehill." Xian wasn't willing to budge and insisted on holding her, so Chu Lian let her be. Once they entered the bedroom, just as she was about to lie down on the chaise by the bed, Senior Servant Zhong ordered all the maidservants in the room to leave. Chu Lian found it strange. She gaped a little at Senior Servant Zhong's sudden actions. "Momo, what is it? Do you have something to say to me in private?" Senior Servant Zhong had some knowledge of medicine and midwifery. While she had been away at the rural holdings of House Jingan, she had helped quite a few pregnant women deliver their children. She was a very capable person. He Changdi respected her, so Chu Lian also viewed her as half a senior family member. Senior Servant Zhong walked over to Chu Lian and sat down in front of her. She took Chu Lian's hand in her own and smiled. "Third young madam, this old servant will ask someone to clear out the side room and move third young master's daily necessities over." Chapter 663, Suspicion. 1. Chu Lian seemed rather confused. She couldn't understand what Senior Servant Zhong meant by her words. She turned towards Senior Servant Zhong with a dazed expression. Since they were getting along well now, why did they have to sleep separately? Senior Servant Zhong coughed and tried to explain patiently. "Third young madam, since you're pregnant now, you have to take care of your body. You and third young master are both young, so it might be hard to control yourselves at night. If your activities were to harm the child, then it wouldn't be good, wouldn't it?" Senior Servant Zhong had already phrased it as directly as she could. If Chu Lian couldn't understand it even now, then she would be an idiot. Chu Lian's face immediately flushed red. She had never thought of the problem of sleeping arrangements after getting pregnant. While Chu Lian wasn't very willing to sleep separately, she had come from the modern world and she didn't know what the customs were here. She didn't know what He Changdi's opinion was either. Thus, she decided not to blindly make a decision now. Chu Lian acted as if she was too shy to speak and refused to reply. Senior servant Zhong got a little antsy upon seeing that she wasn't replying. Third young madam, please listen to this old servant. The first 3 months of pregnancy are crucial, and it's easy for accidents to happen at this stage. Furthermore, all noble families follow this rule. The old servant was about to try persuading her further, when a low and menacing man's voice sounded behind her. No need. Just bring in a chaise for me next to the bed. Hearing that it was He Changdi behind her, senior servant Zhong turned around in stunned surprise. Chu Lian looked up, clearly pleasantly surprised to see him. The joy shining in Chu Lian's sparkling eyes couldn't be hidden at all, they shone like 2 bright stars. Facing her elated expression, He Changdi knew that his decision had earned his wife's favor. Senior servant Zhong gaped a little before replying reluctantly, wouldn't that be too hard on third young master? There's no need to say any more. I've already decided. He Changdi's tone was resolute, leaving no room for anyone to change his mind. Senior servant Zhong shut her mouth and sighed inwardly. She was also happy for third young madam. Third young master seemed to care for third young madam more than she thought. Understood, this old servant will make the arrangements now. He Changdi waved his hand, if there's nothing else, you're dismissed. Senior servant Zhong bobbed in respect and was about to leave when He Changdi called out to her, Momo, keep the servants under control. Don't let the news of Liana's pregnancy out for the time being. Senior servant Zhong seemed to hesitate, then the old residents. Ever since they had moved out from the Jingan estate, for He Changdi and Chu Lian, the Jingan estate had become the old residence. He Changdi paused before shaking his head slightly. Keep it a secret from the old residents too. Well, wait until Liana hits 2 months and her pregnancy is stable, then I'll take Liana personally to the old residents to announce the good news. Senior servant Zhong was thinking of persuading him otherwise, but when she thought back to Great Dr. Miao's diagnosis, she swallowed her words back down. Great Dr. Miao had said that they had almost lost the child in Chu Lian's belly. If anything happened, and they told the old residents too early, wouldn't it just turn out to be false hope? The senior family members in the old residence might even blame third young master and madam for it. Waiting until the pregnancy was stable before announcing it would be the best course of action. Senior servant nodded upon understanding the circumstances. She bobbed once again towards Chu Lian and He Changdi, before quietly retreating out of the room to manage the other maidservants. Once senior servant Zhong left, He Changdi strode over to Chu Lian's side. He reached out with his powerful arms and slid them under her knees and back. He lifted her from the chaise in a princess carry, then settled onto the chaise with her on top. He Changdi placed one hand on Chu Lian's shoulders, while the other was placed gently on her belly. His tone was filled with a soft warmth. Liana, we're going to have a child. Chu Lian was equally happy. She had been waiting for this little bean's arrival for a few months. Hubby, would you like a boy or a girl? Chu Lian raised her head to stare into He Changdi's soft gaze. He Changdi bent his body over slightly to place a kiss on her smooth forehead. A daughter. It would be best if she looks like you. She'll definitely be very cute. Chu Lian puffed up her cheeks and glared at him. You're just saying that to make me happy, right? Eldest brother only has little Anne and little Lin, and second brother hasn't gotten married yet. It's not just grandmother, but even father and mother are probably waiting for me to give birth to a boy. He Changdi stiffened up. He hadn't expected Chu Lian to respond this way. He thought back to what Great Dr. Miao had told him in private. The doctor had mentioned that pregnant women were more susceptible to changes in mood as well as emotions, and that he had to be more understanding and forgiving of his wife. His brows relaxed and he stroked Chu Lian's silky hair with one hand. Actually, He Changdi had truly been speaking his mind. He did want a daughter for his first child. When he thought of having a mini Chu Lian running around, his heart immediately melted into a puddle of mush. Whether it's a boy or a girl, they'll be our child, I'll treat them the same. If the future little bun were to find out what his father had said today, he would definitely burst into tears and question his father. A satisfied smile surfaced on Chu Lian's face after getting He Changdi's answer. She was a modern person at heart and she didn't favor any gender in particular. No matter which gender their child belonged to, she would still guide and protect them the same. Furthermore, it wasn't up to her whether she gave birth to a boy or a girl. If it didn't turn out to be a boy, then it was Changdi's problem. Chapter 664, Suspicion, 2. Sanlang hugged his lovely wife in his embrace. His warm palm unconsciously landed back on Chu Lian's abdomen. As if afraid that his touch would harm the fragile life growing within, he didn't dare to rest his palm fully on her abdomen and instead, simply stroked the sides softly. Chu Lian didn't feel that anything was wrong with Changdi's actions or the importance he was placing on their unborn child. It wasn't just him after all, even she treasured their child very much. That little unformed being was going to be their legacy on this earth. There was nothing cuter than creating a new life, what more a life that they had created together. A thought came to Chu Lian suddenly, and she wriggled around in Changdi's embrace. What were you discussing with Uncle Miao just now? Changdi looked down at her without any visible emotions in his expression, although it looked slightly stiff. Uncle Miao passed down some things to take note of during the pregnancy. Chu Lian was a little touched by this gesture. Normally, most doctors or physicians wouldn't know much about taking care of a pregnant woman unless they specialized in gynecology. However, Great Dr. Miao was the exception, and he had even specially passed down that knowledge to Changdi. Once my pregnancy is stable, let's prepare a gift for Uncle Miao. Changdi nodded seriously. What Chu Lian didn't know was that Uncle Miao had only called Changdi out to warn him repeatedly not to sleep with Chu Lian in the first trimester of her pregnancy. He had also warned Changdi to control himself. The rest of the information about pregnancy had only been told to him as an aside. The couple rested on the chaise together for a while. Chu Lian spoke up softly. Changdi, why didn't you tell me about those things earlier? Changdi stiffened up. The arm he had placed under Chu Lian's neck moved to help her tuck in some stray strands of hair. You know about it all? Changdi's voice was reminiscent of the tolling of an ancient set of bells, able to make one immersed in its sound. Chu Lian spoke rather unhappily. It was Sister Hui who specially came to tell me about it. That loose-mouthed woman. Changdi remained silent without speaking. It was only Chu Lian used her elbow to jab his sturdy chest that Sanlang reluctantly spoke up. Liana, I didn't want you to worry for me. It was Prince Jin and I who miscalculated this time. Chu Lian suddenly fought out of his embrace and sat up. She turned around to glare at him with disbelief. You. The two of you really developed your own silver mine. She seemed like a fluffed-up kitten hissing angrily at an opponent, not at all threatening and very cute. Sanlang couldn't resist pinching one of her soft and smooth cheeks. A corner of his mouth curled up, giving him a devilish flair that made Chu Lian's heart skip a bit. Don't you know about everything already? Chu Lian gulped audibly. She slapped his chest. What the hell were you thinking? How could you dare to do such a thing? You're lucky His Majesty didn't blame you for it. Changdi harumphed inwardly. Even if they didn't do it, there would have been someone else who did. It was Xiaobo Jian who had used that private silver mine to get to where he did in his previous lifetime. The silver mine was in the north, not too far from the mountain where Chu Lian had fallen. It was the Tu Hun spies who first found it. Although he had known of this vaguely in his past, he hadn't had the details of its location, nor had he known that this had something to do with the Tu Huns. It wasn't until this lifetime that he had gone to investigate further and gotten all the details. That was when he had found out that the Tu Huns wanted to steal the silver mine for themselves. Xiaobo Jian had likely been in cahoots with the Tu Huns even in his past life. It was also there was Tu Hun interference that he and Prince Jin hadn't suffered any consequences on the surface even after this matter had been reported to the Emperor. To the rest of the world, they had cleared out all the Tu Hun spies and secured the silver mine for their empire. However, it was a different matter altogether in private. The Emperor's opinion of them had likely sunk to the lowest. How could the Emperor not lay blame on them? Just from the spring hunt alone, they could see that the Emperor had purposely suppressed Prince Jin from shining too much and had intentionally shown favor to 6th Prince instead. 6th Prince was only 15 this year, yet the Emperor had actually given him permission to join in court. Those with discerning eyes could tell that the crown prince had been locked up and was only an empty shell. The ones who had the ability to fight for the throne were 4th prince and 6th prince. However, back when they had discovered the silver mine, the only ones with them had been their trusted subordinates. They had even placed a group of loyal assassins sworn to the death there. Going by common sense, the existence of the silver mine should never have leaked out. How had this news somehow made it up to the emperor too? He had been investigating along with 4th prince's men these few days, but none of the subordinates seemed suspicious. He had known of the silver mine thanks to his previous memories. Then, could there be someone else who was the same as him? Changdis' pupils dilated as a dangerous light shone from them. Each suspicious incident seemed to be connected by an invisible line. Meeting Xiaobo Jian in Suzhou, Chu Lian getting kidnapped, the messy things that had happened when they had returned to the Jinggan estate, Chu Lian almost getting trapped at Miss Yuan's coming of age. There had been so many strange events that had never happened in his previous life. Adding on to that the secret of the silver mine leaking. Unless there was really someone else who had experienced the same lifetime he had. Changdi suppressed his turbulent emotions and took in a deep breath, shoving all his terrifying guesses to the bottom of his heart. What's done is done, we can't cry over spilled milk. Sanlang's voice was cold and calm. Chu Lian sighed. That was true. Things had already come to this point. She didn't think that Changdi and Prince Jin developing a mine on their own was that major of a crime. Even if they hadn't done it, someone else would have. If the silver mine had landed in the hands of someone sinister, then the situation might be even more dangerous. This was a selfish world. While there weren't any obvious factions in the war for the throne, since Changdi was close to Prince Jin, and if Prince Jin wanted to vie for the throne, Sanlang had no choice but to be dragged into Prince Jin's faction. Chapter 665, Bestowal of an Engagement. 1. It seemed like he had to be more careful in the future. Chu Lian hesitated before asking, so the accessories and storefront you gifted me previously were all bought with the money from the silver mines? A corner of Changdis' lips lifted. He reached out to hold her more securely so that her body wouldn't lean over and touch the cold windowsill. Just by seeing that smile of his, Chu Lian knew that she had guessed correctly. She admonished him. You really just used it without any shame. If you look at it more strictly, you committed graft. Changdis' deep gaze fell upon the flushed cheeks of the woman he loved in his arms. He sighed inwardly. Although his wife was smart and cunning, she was too inexperienced and merciful. If she really met someone with no holds barred when it came to scheming, she would definitely fall into their traps. Rest assured. The silver I spent was barely the tip of the iceberg compared to the size of that silver mine. The government has its own laws. Even if it was His Highness and I who discovered that silver mine, there are some laws we can't circumvent selfishly. Liana, don't worry. I've only taken what I deserved. Chu Lian was a little confused by Changdis' answer, but she didn't continue questioning. She didn't understand the twists and turns of the politics in court, so she wouldn't comment thoughtlessly. However, she now knew that her lunatic husband wasn't a stickler for the rules. Instead, he was even more cunning than a fox. Chu Lian laid back down on Changdis' firm chest. She twirled a single lock of his long, black hair in one hand, continuously winding his hair around her finger. I know that Imperial concubine Wei Yi found out. So you really went to pick herbs for Imperial Princess Liao that night? Chu Lian glared at him, thinking that her husband was just too honest. Why had he so obediently gone to do Imperial concubine Wei's bidding? Even if she had blackmail on him, couldn't he have been a little smarter about it? No, Changdi replied in a calm voice. Chu Lian, I didn't go out to pick herbs for Imperial Princess Liao. In actual fact, the Imperial physicians weren't lacking for supplies. All she was trying to do was to make life difficult for me. I simply went out to the forest and knocked out the attendants that she had sent to follow me. All I did was wait in the mountains until midnight before turning to the camp. Changdi had only done all that for show. Although he wasn't afraid of Imperial concubine Wei's threats, he was still an official and someone that the emperor had personally administered. As much as Imperial concubine Wei tried to throw her weight around, she couldn't interfere with the workings of the court, so she wouldn't be able to affect him much. However, it was different for Chu Lian. Even if Imperial concubine Wei wouldn't touch him, she could use her identity to pressure Chu Lian. While they had been camped out at the hunting grounds, their tent hadn't been too far off from the Emperor and Imperial concubine Wei's tents. It would have been all too easy for Imperial concubine Wei to find some excuse to punish Chu Lian. However, there was something strange about it all. Over the 2 days in the hunting grounds, ever since Chu Lian had fallen off her horse and started recuperating in her tent, Imperial concubine Wei seemed to have forgotten about her entirely. She hadn't even mentioned Chu Lian once. This was something that He Changdi had yet to figure out. He had followed along with Imperial concubine Wei's requests to prevent her from taking out her temper on Chu Lian. As for picking herbs on the mountain in the middle of the night, he really hadn't done it all. He didn't even recognize any of the herbs Imperial concubine Wei had ordered him to collect. She had sent him out in the darkness of the night too. It would be even stranger if he had been able to find any herbs. After he had knocked out the attendant Imperial concubine Wei had sent to follow him, he had simply rested against a tree. Lai Yu had even helped to start a fire to keep them warm. He Changdi had waited there until midnight before returning to camp. He had also picked a few random weeds off the forest floor to hand over to Imperial Physician Ju. Imperial Physician Ju was smart and he would understand what to say to Imperial concubine Wei. However, fighting a cold war with his wife was rather terrible. Even though He Changdi had only been sitting next to a tree with a cloak around him and a fire burning merrily before him, he hadn't been able to get rid of any of his fatigue. It was only when the cold of the night had completely chilled his body that he had rushed back, all tired out. Chu Lian glanced at him. He Changdi, you have to remember this. In the future, even if we quarrel and hate each other, we still have to give each other a chance to explain things, okay? She didn't want this situation to happen again, where he would avoid her when she wanted an explanation from him. Nor did she want to wait until he regretted things and wanted to explain, as it would be too late. Both of them were in the wrong for the conflict this time. Although they were clearly in love, if they really split up just because of such a small misunderstanding, it would be too regretful. All right, Liana, I promise you. Chu Lian wrapped both her arms around his narrow waist and breathed in his fresh and sunny scent. He Changdi saw that her eyelids were already fighting to stay open the moment she leaned her head against his chest. He whispered gently by her ear, "Do you want to take a nap?" Chu Lian made a light millimeter in agreement and slipped away into sweet slumber. She had been on tenterhooks these few days. Now that their misunderstandings had been resolved, the tension had melted away, leaving her in a relaxed state. Pregnant women were He Changdi looked down at the woman in his embrace. He carefully shifted his left arm so that she would move into a more comfortable pose against his shoulder. He pulled over a nearby wool blanket and laid it over Chu Lian's slender little figure. Chu Lian seemed to have been startled by his action, even in the midst of sleep. A wrinkle developed between her brows as they drew together. He Changdi bent over and placed a light kiss on her forehead, like the touch of a feather, causing her brow to relax. She should have been clothed in the finest fabrics, served by a crowd of servants, tutored by the best teachers, and following that, under his protection, she should have transformed into the most dazzling and eye-catching pearl. However, reality had been completely different. When Chu Lian had been young, going by what this scroll said, she likely wouldn't have had more than 1 or 2 little snacks, let alone the bare necessities. Eunuch Wei trembled upon catching sight of the Emperor's expression. The Emperor had survived the war against his siblings to claim the throne. Even if he had a kind enough appearance, his inner heart was actually cold and ruthless, with countless schemes and plots brewing. Eunuch Wei had been serving him for so many decades that he could somewhat guess a little at the Emperor's moods, even if his true thoughts were hidden. Every time the Emperor showed an expression like that, it meant that misfortune was about to befall some poor soul. Eunuch Wei's prediction was rather accurate. The Emperor forcefully shut the scroll in his hands. He turned towards eunuch Wei, who was standing in a stiff position behind him. "Prepare the ink." There was a blank imperial decree scroll laid out on the desk. In a short moment, the blank scroll was completely filled up. The emperor tossed the finished imperial decree over to eunuch Wei casually. He left behind an order: send someone to the Ying estate to announce the decree. Eunuch Wei's hands trembled. When he recalled the glimpses of the decree that he had seen, a chill went up his spine. After finishing all this, the emperor gave another order: He Lin, go over to Yang Yangfeng and have him think of a way to remove Chu Qizheng's position. He Lin froze up for an instant, but he didn't dare to refute the order. He made a cupped fist salute and left to do as the emperor had ordered. Chu Qizheng had originally been given a low-ranked slack position in the court. Later on, he had somehow gotten connected with the Pan estate and Lord Pan had personally recommended him for a promotion. From then, Chu Qizheng had become a proper sixth-ranked official. It was also due to this official position that Chu Qizheng had suddenly become one of the more promising men in the younger generation of House Ying. He had also stabilized the status of the second branch in the Ying estate. Even old Duchess Ying had stopped mentioning the lack of heirs for the second branch due to this. The next day, an astonishing piece of news spread throughout the whole capital. The emperor had personally bestowed an engagement upon House Ying's 8th Miss, Chu Yuan. The groom in question was Prince Yongkang's only son, Royal Prince Shou. Speaking of which, Prince Yongkang was actually the emperor's uncle, and the emperor had been the one who had conferred the title of Royal Prince Shou upon his son. Royal Prince Shou was already 23 this year. At that age, it was just right for him to take his first wife. Furthermore, Royal Prince Shou was considered part of the imperial family. While it seemed to be a good pairing on the surface, those in the know were all waiting to watch the fireworks, and were laughing behind the backs of the second branch of House Ying. The reason was none other than this: Royal Prince Shou was a half-wit. He was a robust and prosperous person, who always had a foolish expression on his face. Prince Yongkang had married his older cousin, Royal Princess Longjia. Royal Prince Shou was the masterpiece of this marriage between close relations. Chapter 667, Heartless, 1. House Ying had not completely fallen out of noble society up till now purely because of the strenuous efforts of old Duke Ying. It was a sad story. Although House Ying was large in number, there weren't many who were actually capable. Even Chu Lian's father Chu Qizheng was considered one of the better ones in the family, so the abilities of the rest went without saying. Meanwhile, old Duchess Ying was full of wariness and vigilance. She wasn't willing to use funds to prop up other branches of the family that had more potential. This made the rest of their clan very unhappy with House Ying. This caused a vicious cycle within the family. Finally, when a rare promising young seed had popped up from amongst old Duke Ying's disciples, they hadn't been able to catch hold of Xiao Bojian either. Now it was too late even if old Duke Ying tried to force Xiao Bojian into the family himself. When the emperor's imperial decree reached the Ying estate, none of the members of House Ying felt sad or shocked. Conversely, they were all extremely elated. A bestowed marriage. Furthermore, it was the emperor himself who had personally decreed it. The groom was even a royal prince, a true member of the imperial family. Although there seemed to be something wrong with his mind, it wouldn't affect his standing due to his birth. As long as Miss Yuan married him, she would become a third-ranked royal princess by marriage. That was an honor that most of the Chu family ladies wouldn't even be able to beg for. Even Chu Lian's own marriage couldn't compare to that honor. Everyone in the Ying estate was beaming with joy. Even the stewards started ordering the servants to decorate the estate and make it seem more festive and harmonious. Even old Duchess Ying was chuckling. She praised Miss Yuan for being lucky in front of all the other ladies of the estate. The second branch was even looked upon more favorably due to this engagement. The only ones who had faces full of worry and despair were likely Second Madam and 8th Miss Yuan now. Chu Yuan was sprawled across Second Madam's lap. She had already cried until she was all out of breath. She sobbed, "Mother, I don't want to marry that idiot. Mother, I'm not going to marry him. Please, help me think of a way out. The one I like is Brother Xiao. Second Madam's eyes were red and swollen. Miss Yuan was her only daughter, her very lifeline. The others in the estate had been blinded by riches and status. None of them were truly concerned for her daughter's plight. Other than his birthright, there was nothing about Royal Prince Shou that could compare to even the most common man. How could she just watch as her daughter's life was ruined? She stroked her daughter's messy hair. Yuana, don't panic. When your father returns, Mother will ask your father to intervene. Your father has an official position and he has many connections. Even that Lord Pan has some relation to him. Mother will definitely get your father to think of a way so you won't have to marry that half-wit. Right as mother and daughter were huddling together and crying, Chu Chijing returned to the second branch's courtyard. His entire being seemed dull and lifeless. He had lost his high spirits and his eyes seemed soulless. Hidden in his sleeves, he was still gripping that official document that had caused his days. His face seemed to have aged a decade since morning. The menial maidservant who was sweeping the courtyard came over to greet him with a smile. She even tried to get a bonus by congratulating him. This servant congratulates second master, second madam and eighth miss on the good news. Chu Kisheng's face immediately contorted into a monstrous expression, veins popping out on his forehead. Scram! The maidservant stood frozen on the spot for a moment. When she finally processed what happened, her face paled and she scrambled away in fright. Chu Chijing returned to his room, cloaked in anger. Another maidservant greeted him at the entrance, but Chu Chijing didn't even say a word in return. He simply strode right into the room. Within the bedroom, second madam was still comforting Miss Yuan with a hug. When second madam saw that her husband had returned, she immediately patted her daughter on the back and stood up to welcome her husband back. She started off with a complaint. Dear, you have to help Yuana, otherwise her entire life will be ruined. The rumors about the foolish royal Prince Shou had already spread all over the capital. What kind of life could a lady expect by marrying a fool? It wasn't even guaranteed that they might be able to have children. Second madam had been completely shocked out of her wits by her daughter's sudden engagement. Adding on to that her own urgency, she hadn't noticed the stormy expression on Chu Kisheng's face when he entered. Chu Chijing was already immersed in his own troubles. His wife's complaint only added on to the mountain of frustration in his heart and acted as the spark that lit up his rage. In a burst of temper, he shoved his wife aside forcefully. Although he hadn't learned martial arts, he was still a tall man and he had put enough force into his action. With a single move, he actually managed to push second madam off her feet and onto the floor. Second madam hadn't expected such a violent reply from Chu Chijing. She laid sprawled over the carpet in the bedroom where she had landed, eyes wide with disbelief as she stared at Chu Chijing. She clearly hadn't recovered from the physical and mental blow. What's wrong with becoming a royal princess? If not for the imperial decree, could Miss Yuan even hope to marry into a prince's family? Chu Kisheng's voice was both cold and heartless. His words pierced like needles into the hearts of second madam and Chu Yuan. Both mother and daughter had their eyes wide in shock, especially Chu Yuan. At that moment, she even suspected whether the cold middle-aged man before was truly her father. Her father had always spoiled her and protected her. Whatever she wanted, her father would always do his best to get it for her. However, the man before her had suddenly told her to marry a fool. Father! Miss Yuan let out a heartrending wail. Chapter 668, Heartless, 2, Get out of here. Miss Yuan, go back to your room and prepare for your marriage. If you dare to plot anything else, I'll destroy you myself. Chu Yuan collapsed onto the chaise, her eyes bloodshot from her own rage. Father, I'll never marry that idiot. Even if I have to die. Me. That's not up to you. Servants. Send your young miss back to her room. If anything happens to 8th miss, all of you had better prepare for death. Chu Chijing was especially ferocious today. Even second madam had been scared into trembling, let alone the servants at the side. Miss Yuan screamed and struggled, to no avail. 2 strong menial servants stuffed a handkerchief in her mouth and tied up her limbs, and she was quickly carted away. It wasn't until Chu Yuan's muffled shouts could no longer be heard that Second Madam seemed to rouse herself, as if awakening from a dream. She was helped off the floor by a maidservant. She walked over to Chu Chizheng and stared up at him. Chu Chizheng, Yuana is our only daughter. How could you treat her this way? Is your official position more important than your own flesh and blood? Chu Chizheng let out a mocking snort. He threw the letter in his hands onto Second Madam's face. Position? Is this the official position you're talking about? Second Madam didn't understand. She bore with the humiliation and picked up the letter from the ground. She opened it and read it, only to be hit by a bolt from the blue. It wasn't just a letter. It was an official document of dismissal. The second branch had lost everything today. Second Madam had already reached her limits today. Her eyes rolled back into her head as she slipped into a dead faint. Luckily, the maidservant next to her reacted fast enough to catch her, otherwise she would have hit her head on the floor. Thus, when Second Madam woke up again, she never said a word about rejecting her daughter's engagement. All that the impoverished second branch could count on was Chu Yuan's marriage now. Sometimes, when faced with a cruel reality, one just had to make some sacrifices. Right now, it had become time for Miss Yuan to make the sacrifice. Chu Chizheng still didn't understand why he had suddenly been fired out of the blue. The couple of the second branch sat on 2 sides of the chaise with gloomy faces. Chu Chizheng suddenly asked, "How much is left of Madam Yes money?" Second Madam was startled by his abrupt question. She waved her trusted handmaid over and told her to retrieve the account books. After reading them over, she said, "Excluding storefronts and farms, there's still 5,000 taels in cash. Give it all to me." Second Madam gaped in surprise. All of it? That was 5,000 taels they were talking about. It wasn't a small sum. Chu Chizheng's heavy gaze swept over Second Madam. She quickly sprang up and went to retrieve an exquisite peachwood chest. Chapter 669, Dijufeng Restaurant. 1. Chu Lian wasn't the only one who was stunned by the sudden decree from the emperor. He Changdi was incredibly surprised as well. At this moment, He Changdi was seated in Prince Jin's study. The two stared at each other in bewilderment. They just couldn't understand the emperor's intentions. Could it be that the emperor wanted to raise House Ying up again? That wouldn't be right. A mere bestowal didn't mean anything. Besides, House Ying didn't even have any children with talent. Earlier, there had even been a rumor that Chu Lian's father, House Ying's second master, had been dismissed from office. Prince Jin's azure eyes were filled with doubt. Could it be that his extremely wise father was just having fun causing drama? Perhaps he was simply toying with House Ying's second branch for amusement. Giving them a slap and then handing out some candy? But these candies weren't even sweet. Even the reincarnated He Changdi couldn't figure out why the emperor had done this. After a period of silence, Prince Jin finally spoke. RDI, our earnings aren't enough to cover our expenses anymore. They now had assistance from House Sima, but they still had to increase their forces, and they had to compete with 6th Prince in secret. There were too many avenues where funds were needed, so Prince Jin and He Changdi couldn't even manage to break even. Actually, it was easy for them to acquire funds publicly. With their statuses, there would definitely be rich people who would lend a helping hand. However, the situation right now was peculiar. Everything had to be done in secret, and for some matters, it was also better for fewer people to be in the know. He Changdi's cool face became increasingly grim. I'll find a solution. He Changdi's eyes deepened. Going by his original plan, it should have been smooth sailing once they secured the silver mine, but there was unexpectedly a slip-up with acquiring the mine. I will send more people to investigate. As he spoke, Prince Jin handed a letter over to He Changdi. The Heiyu army sent this. It was no big deal for him to read Prince Jin's letters, so He Changdi quickly opened the letter and read its contents. What he saw put a slight smile on his face. Xiao Wujing is truly unscrupulous. He even managed to put a person like Wei Fengzi under his control. RDI, I think we should warn father about this. I'm afraid Xiaobo Jian is plotting something. Prince Jin was slightly worried. Wei Fengzi was imperial concubine Wei's younger sister. They had been born from the same mother and she was Minister Kong's wife. This was something that they had to think through carefully. He Changdi looked out of the window as the skies slowly darkened. It was getting late. Yi, it's late now, I have to go home. With that said, He Changdi had already stood up and was walking towards the exit. Prince Jin scoffed, and sourly replied, look at how smug you've gotten since Jeannie got pregnant. You've probably been staying by her side 24 hours a day, right? Even if you don't mind, Jeannie would be annoyed. He Sanlang's normally frozen face had changed to something more gentle. There was a warm smile on his face. He hadn't hid the news of Chu Lian's pregnancy from his best friend. What? Are you jealous, Yi? Just get General Sima to make a child for you then. After getting teased right back by his friend, the aloof and proud Prince Jin actually blushed. Miss Yuan and Royal Prince Shou's wedding was to be held in 2 months. After the marriage had been bestowed by imperial decree, House Ying started talks with Prince Yongkang over the details of the marriage. After the initial buzz of gossip, it was as if the whole capital had gone into absolute silence. In the following month, everything went as smooth as silk. Chu Lian's restaurant on Zhukyu Avenue had already opened. Chu Lian had thought of the new restaurant's name herself, Dijufeng. Just like the old Guilin restaurant, this place was separated into inner and outer courts. However, there was now an extra floor of private rooms added on the 3rd floor of the building in the front. A small stage had been built to the side of the main hall on the ground floor. Dijufeng had a collaboration with Pear Garden to have their actors come over to perform a show every day at noon and 3 o'clock. As for what the actors would perform, the manager would either set the songs in advance, or allow guests who were having their meal there to pay for a song they wanted. This time, there wasn't as much fanfare to Dijufeng's opening as when Guilin restaurant had opened. On the opening day, all they had done was to light up 2 strings of firecrackers and send gifts to the neighboring shops, and that was it. They were open for business. When they opened in such a subdued manner, everyone around them was wondering how this mysterious Dijufeng restaurant was going to end up. However, moments later, carriage after carriage stopped in front of Dijufeng's entrance, causing the eyes of those who had been secretly paying attention to open wide. Amongst the people who were watching was Dean Restaurant's manager Wang. Manager Wang stood in the private room on the 2nd floor of his restaurant, with the old bookkeeper who had worked with him for many years by his side. Manager Wang had his hands clasped behind his back as he squinted past the half-open window. Just who is backing Dijufeng? I've long heard that old Lin's store was bought over by a noble, but when I asked him, the old fogey refused to reveal their identity. The bookkeeper's gaze landed on Dijufeng's entrance. The newly opened restaurant didn't look any different from before. It seemed like all that changed was its signboard and nothing else. Chapter 670, Dijufeng Restaurant, 2. Thanks to the trend Guilin Restaurant had set on its opening day, any new shop with a noble backer and some money would at least put on a lion dance performance to liven things up. If they attracted the attention of the civilians around, the name of the shop would be spread around by word of mouth. However, Dijufeng was different. They hadn't even bothered sounding a gong or beating a drum for their opening. Instead, they were ridiculously low profile. Manager Wang had experienced many ups and downs at his old age, so this put him deep in thought. Such an abnormality is a sign that something is amiss. Old Zhao, your eyesight is better than mine. Can you make out which families those carriages are from? Actually, Manager Wang had just been asking rather casually. Although his eyes were old and his vision was blurry, he was still able to make out the shape of the carriages. Those were just ordinary green carriages. There wouldn't be anyone of high status in those, so he was just asking offhand. The old bookkeeper was probably thinking that way as well, but when he saw a particular person being helped off the carriage, he was so shocked that he nearly fainted. He quickly gripped the table beside him with his other hand covering his chest. He had an expression of excitement. yet of dread. Manager Wang was startled by his sudden movement, and quickly helped him up. With creased brows, he asked, "Old Zhao, what's going on with you? Weren't you completely fine a moment ago? Why do you have such an ugly expression on your face?" The bookkeeper waved his hand. Bookkeeper Zhao was expert at his work, but he had another skill, which was a photographic memory. He was practically able to remember the faces of anybody that he had met once. Once, when he had been walking out of Dean Restaurant's accounts room, he happened to overhear the emperor having a conversation within a private room. He had been so frightened by it that he ran off immediately. Later on, curiosity got the better of him as he peeked at the reigning emperor's face from afar. With that one glance, the face of the emperor remained in his memory up till now. Dean Restaurant's dim sum was considered top-notch in the capital, so it wasn't strange for the emperor to come down to have a taste incognito. Once he caught his breath, he looked at Manager Wang while appearing choked up but smiling. Moments later, he whispered into Manager Wang's ear, "Manager, the one who just alighted the carriage was." The old bookkeeper first pointed at the skies with his forefinger, then raised his thumb. He nervously gulped down his saliva. Manager Wang froze up in shock, then widened his eyes in uncertainty. He gripped the bookkeeper's shoulder and asked, "Are you sure that you didn't make a mistake?" The old bookkeeper shook his head with a bitter smile. "Manager, you know my ability very well. When have I ever made a mistake in identifying someone?" Hearing the certainty in the old bookkeeper's voice, the two old men shrank back, and were even more in awe of Di Jufeng now. That's right. On the opening day of Di Jufeng, the emperor himself had secretly come to support them. As Chu Lian was still confined in the estate due to her pregnancy, she didn't learn of this on the day itself, but He Changdi did inform her of this later on. She didn't know how to react. The emperor had given her too much of an honor. The emperor had personally gone to support the restaurant that she secretly opened. Since the ultimate boss had already gone, the other officials of the court would also go down to the restaurant, even if it were just to flatter the emperor. Therefore, there was no need to fear that there would be a lack of customers. The emperor was practically a living signboard. Besides, Di Jufeng's food could only be better and never worse than Guilin Restaurant before its closure. Anyone who had eaten at Guilin Restaurant before would definitely realize what was going on. There was simply no need to guess who the actual boss of Di Jufeng was, as it was definitely Marchioness An Yuan. Chu Lian left Di Jufeng in the care of Zhu Wen, who had come recommended by He Changdi, while the northern borders market was left to Manager Qin. The northern market had already expanded to over 10 times its original size according to Maya Yen and his brother, who had come back from the northern border. Even Chu Lian found this hard to believe. Maya Yen and Narisong were now incredibly fluent in Mandarin. If one heard their voice without seeing their faces, they definitely wouldn't be able to guess that they were barbarians. Maya Yen and Narisong now worked under Manager Qin, and were responsible for supervising the northern market. Currently, Liangju was no longer just a place for the Great Wu dynasty and the barbarians to trade, it had become a place that attracted merchants from the surrounding countries. This meant that there was now a new trade route between Su City and Liangju that came out of nowhere. Liangju City was no longer the desolate city that Chu Lian had left 4 months ago. While it was still a simple and crude border city in appearance, the amount of traffic and business it was getting could be compared to Su City's. Originally, Yuehan had wanted to stay by Chu Lian's side, but Chu Lian hadn't agreed. She knew that Yuehan loved her sons very much, and that she wouldn't actually want to leave her sons at all. Therefore, she had Yuehan stay with her sons, and had her take care of their everyday needs. In the beginning of June, summer arrived in the capital. Maya Yen and his younger brother Narisong once again came to the capital from Liangju. There were numerous matters regarding the business that the two needed to report to Chu Lian. The scrawny and weak brothers that Chu Lian had met a long time ago now looked completely different. Especially Maya Yen. The bone structure of the barbarians was different from the people of the Great Wu. Their features were more pronounced than the people of the Great Wu. They had higher nose bridges, deeper eye sockets and sharper angles overall. The colors of their eyes were also slightly different. If one looked closely, they would find that their eyes were light brown, unlike the amber and brown-colored eyes that the citizens of the Great Wu dynasty had. After eating well for a few months and learning martial arts training from He Changdi's personal guards, as well as getting a good education from Manager Qin, 19-year-old Ma Yan had broken free from the constant torment of his illness, and had grown into a full-fledged, handsome and well-built young man. This time, his brown eyes sparkled even more, as if he had just seen something precious to him. As the men walked closer to them, Chu Lian was observing them. Of course, she noticed Myrian's expression and made a mental note of it. Her eyes slid sideways to cast a nonchalant gaze over Wenlan, who had her head bowed as she focused on her embroidery. A smirk danced on Chu Lian's lips. Manager Qin had come here with Ma Yan to report on the progress of the northern market, as well as hand over the account books for the season. Knowing that Chu Lian was pregnant now and that she couldn't overexert herself, Manager Qin only stayed for a while before leaving. Just as Manager Qin was leaving, they bumped into He Changdi, who was returning to the estate. He Changdi quickly noticed Ma Yan standing behind Manager Qin. Ma Yan came over to greet He Changdi rather enthusiastically, perhaps since they hadn't met for some time. He made a proper salute towards He Changdi, as befitting a citizen of the Great Wu. Brother He Changdi was a little surprised. He hadn't managed to recognize that this tall and skinny foreign boy was Ma Yan. The Ma Yan of today was utterly different from the Ma Yan of his past lifetime. In his past life, Ma Yan had been so thin that he had been practically skin and bones. He had also been dreadfully ill. He had never seen Ma Yan look so lively before. Ma Yan grinned and rubbed the back of his head sheepishly. Brother He, I didn't think that you would be able to recognize me. Even Amar said that I've changed too much. He Changdi's gaze was slightly warmer than usual as he patted Myrian's shoulder. How are Amar and your brother? Ma Yan smiled, revealing a mouth full of white teeth. Amar is doing very well. My brother and I are both working under Manager Qin and learning. He Changdi glanced in the direction the two of them had come from. Did you go to see Madam just now? Manager Qin was the one who replying to my lord, I just handed over the account books for the northern market to Madam, together with Ma Yan. When He Changdi had left the Jinggan estate, he had brought out all the servants from Songtao court. Since matriarch he was still around, their rank in their family was still the same, so the servants hadn't changed the way they addressed their masters in the Anyuan estate. They still called the couple third young madam and third young master. However, now that there was a child in Chu Lian's belly, they couldn't continue the old way of addressing their masters, since their masters had upgraded by one generation. If Chu Lian gave birth to a boy, he would become the little heir Anyuan, and He Changdi and Chu Lian would then have to be called master and madam. He Changdi turned to Ma Yan and said, I'll go and visit Amar some other time. He then let Manager Qin and Ma Yan leave. Chapter 672, Enjoying the Breeze, 2. He Changdi entered the inner court, only to see that Chu Lian was still sitting under the grape voices and hadn't even moved a little. When he had left the estate at noon, Chu Lian had already been sitting there. It was indeed rather cool under the grapevines here. Since it was close to an alley, a breeze would pass by from time to time and the dense grapevines absorbed much of the harsh sunlight. It might even be comfier than a modern air-conditioned room. Xian and Wenlan had already asked a few times, but Chu Lian didn't want to move at all. Although it was summer now, it wasn't good for a pregnant woman to sit in the breeze for too long. However, the group of maidservants couldn't get Chu Lian to budge. She had already started flipping through the account books that Manager Qin had just delivered. The moment He Changdi entered the courtyard, he was greeted with the sight of the maidservants standing helplessly next to Chu Lian, looking like they wanted to speak but not daring to at all. When Xian noticed He Changdi, her eyes lit up, as if she had just seen her savior. Chu Lian was currently sitting with her back facing He Changdi, so she couldn't see him at all. He Changdi waved his hand at Xian and Wenlan to dismiss them. The two handmaids bobbed in respect before leading the other maidservants away. Chu Lian was still marveling at the speedy development of the market and was immersed in the numbers on the pages with wide eyes. All of a sudden, she was pulled up from behind and into someone's embrace, giving her a fright. She only had time to make a short scream before her mouth was devoured by a familiar pair of lips. Her eyes went even wider, and she finally looked right into the dark eyes of her husband. Chu Lian was so angry that she beat on He Changdi's chest. He Changdi let her struggle, but he made sure to keep her stable in his embrace. He kept one hand over her waist to make sure she wouldn't kick her own belly. At the same time, he refused to give in and played with her tongue mercilessly. It only took a few punches before Chu Lian gave up on moving him. His chest was all hard and it seemed like it didn't even affect him. In the end, all she was doing was making her hands sore. The flurry of movement and the battle between their tongues sapped her strength away, making her boneless. She could only let this lunatic husband of hers do as he liked. When He Changdi finally let go of her tongue, they were already back in their own room. Chu Lian's face was fully flushed. The parts of her neck exposed to the air were also pink. Pregnant women were more sensitive than most. Right now, her eyes were slightly watery, giving her a tender and beguiling aura, seducing the person beholding her beauty. He Changdi's pupils dilated and he took a gulp. All the blood in his body rushed downwards. He sat Chu Lian down on the chaise, while he took a few steps back to put some distance between them. He tugged at his robes awkwardly. He reprimanded her in a cool voice, "You're not allowed to sit in the breeze for more than 2 hours from now on." Chu Lian simply stared at him, tongue-tied. Was he going to nitpick even over this? He was going to become a busybody soon. There was the hint of a pout in her voice as she replied, "It's hot in the room." He Changdi looked around the room and retrieved a hand fan from the side. He opened it up and started fanning her. "Is it still hot now?" Chu Lian didn't know how to reply to that. A twitch developed in the corner of her mouth, and she tried to push away He Changdi, who was starting to lean closer and closer to her. "Why did you come back so early today?" "I didn't go to the ministry today. I was at Prince Jin's estate, so I came home earlier." He Changdi couldn't resist hugging Chu Lian again. Her figure was already small in the first place. Even though she was now more than 3 months pregnant, she hadn't gotten any bigger yet. Only the smooth glow of her skin and her extra sensitivity hinted that there was a new life growing inside her. His arm slid under her slender neck and he continued fanning her. The cool breeze washed over her flushed cheeks and neck, carrying the slight fragrance of her body to his nose, immediately tempting the desire he had suppressed for months. The thought of the silver mine that had been taken away by the emperor suddenly came to Chu Lian's mind. A wrinkle appeared between her brows and she turned to catch He Changdi's collar, looking up at him. She was about to tell him about the northern market when He Changdi bent down to catch her lips once again. He licked her cherry-red lips before nibbling on her full lower lip. Finally, his agile tongue slid into her sweet, warm cavern and immediately overpowered her. Chu Lian gave in to the desire that his actions had stirred. Even if she tried to push him, it had no effect, so she could only wrap her arms around his waist and continuously stroke the area there. For such a tall and strong man, He Changdi's most sensitive area was actually his waist. However, even Chu Lian didn't know that. In the middle of playing with Chu Lian's tongue, He Sanlang suddenly frowned and let out a suppressed moan. Even if it was a man's voice, that moan was very seductive. Before Chu Lian could react, he threw away the fan in his hands and pulled Chu Lian onto his lap. His other hand caught both of Chu Lian's naughty hands and restrained them. Chu Lian quivered a little at the sudden movement, her half-lidded eyes immediately fluttering open. Being held down like this made her shy and timid. She turned her head away because she couldn't meet his eyes in this state. However, there was still a buff arm wrapped around her, so she couldn't get away totally. "He Changdi, let go of me." She panted coquettishly in protest. Right now, her entire body was in his arms. How could He Changdi bear to let go of his lovely wife at this point? A man who had been left high and dry for 2 months was to be feared, especially when it was the lunatic He Changdi. He tightened his embrace around Chu Lian and panted into her ear. The hot and heavy breaths puffing over her ears made them flush instantly. Chu Lian could hear his husky voice pleading, like a big puppy begging for help. "Liana. Help me, please." Chapter 673, Jingyan, 1, No way. That was what Chu Lian wanted to say, but He Changdi didn't even give her the time to reject his plea. He took her soft little hand and started moving it. After a long time, while waiting for him to finish, Chu Lian was starting to feel that the hand was no longer her own. Chu Lian laid in his embrace, panting, her clothes in disarray. Her belt had already been taken off long ago, and the light yellow halter top that was her underwear had been thrown under the chaise by He Sanlang. Although Sanlang still wasn't completely satisfied, for the sake of his wife's body, he hadn't gone any further than that. Of course, the sounds made by the couple had already been overheard by senior servant Zhong, was on duty outside the room. Just as He Sanlang was about to carry Chu Lian off to the bathroom, senior servant Zhong purposely coughed loudly from outside. Chu Lian made an embarrassed and awkward expression. The flush that had receded from her cheeks came back in full force. She secretly pinched He Changdi's arm, hard. He Changdi bent down to kiss her on her forehead, speaking in a low tone to reassure her, "Go ahead and take a bath first. I'll go talk to Momo." Chu Lian wasn't opposed to this suggestion. Senior servant Zhong was He Changdi's servant after all. If he wanted to explain, he could do it by himself. She was too embarrassed to face the old servant. He Changdi gently lowered Chu Lian into the bathtub and called Xian over to serve her, before vanishing outside to talk to senior servant Zhong. When senior servant Zhong saw that He Changdi had walked out of the bedroom, she hesitated to speak. He Changdi coolly spoke up before she could gather her courage. "Momo, you don't have to worry, I know the limits. Uncle Miao has already informed me of what not to do." Senior servant Zhong showed an awkward smile. "It's all right as long as master knows what to do. This old servant shall not overstep her bounds." Once senior servant Zhong was done speaking, He Changdi immediately turned back to the bedroom. Jingyan had been standing behind senior servant Zhong, so she had heard the sounds from the bedroom just the same. She waited until He Changdi had turned his back to them before raising her head. As her gaze landed upon that straight back and slender figure, a mesmerized look appeared on her face. Although He Changdi had always kept an unfriendly and cold expression on his face, his looks were top-notch regardless. He wouldn't lose any of his outstanding aura even if he stood next to Xiaobo Jian. Especially those dark, deep eyes of his which looked like they could pierce right into the heart of anyone and see through all their secrets. Jingyan continued daydreaming about how the icy facade on He Changdi's face might break during moments of passion. She got so excited that her entire body shivered in anticipation. "Why aren't you by third young madam's side?" Jingyan jumped in fright and quickly hid the thin nightgown she had already prepared. Her voice was rather tense as she replied, "Third young madam is asleep. I was all sweaty and I couldn't sleep, so I came back to wipe off the sweat first. I'll go right back once I'm done, and it'll be done quick. Don't worry." Xian didn't think too much of it. Jingyan was normally very quiet and kept her focus on her task. Although she didn't do her tasks very well, it wasn't too bad either. Her work was just average, but Chu Lian had never said anything about it. Xian turned around and continued sleeping, not thinking to bother with Jingyan. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.